Hey guys, tonight we step into the early 1800s, somewhere between the rolling fields and tangled woods of Tennessee. Before street lamps, before railroads, when darkness after sunset was more complete than most people today have ever experienced. The air here carries the smell of damp earth and hickory smoke. And the nights are so still, you can hear the shift of a squirrel in a distant branch. It's quiet, but not empty. There's a single cabin sitting at the edge of a clearing, its chimney breathing a thin line of gray into the pale morning mist. You probably won't survive this if you try living without Wi-Fi. Out here, the nearest neighbor might be a mile away. And delivery service means your own 2 feet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post in the comments where you're listening from, the local time. Let's see who's awake with us tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Bell family's farm doesn't look haunted. It looks, frankly, like work. Split rail fences zigzag around pastures where morning dew clings to the tall grass. A row of corn shivers in the faintest breeze. Chickens fuss under the slanted eaves of a coop patched from mismatched boards. The cabin itself is hewn from logs, each chink filled with a mix of clay and straw that holds the heat in winter and lets the structure breathe in summer. The roof is wood shingles, darkened by weather and the occasional scorch of chimney soot. Mainstream fact: in 1804, John Bell moved his family from North Carolina to this Red River settlement, drawn by the promise of fertile farmland in Robertson County. They weren't alone in making that journey. Tennessee's population was growing fast, its land grants attracting settlers willing to clear forests and start fresh. You step across the yard, boots sinking slightly into the soft ground, and hear the creak of the well's rope as someone hauls up the morning's water. It's the kind of sound that means life here. Creaks, thuds, the rhythmic knock of an axe into seasoned oak. But if you hold still, there's also a strange texture to the quiet. It's layered, like the woods themselves are listening back. Quirky tidbit: some settlers swore the Red River area had talking trees, groans, and murmurs when the wind moved through certain hollows. Most blamed it on the shape of the land or the trunks rubbing together. But the stories gave the place a reputation even before the bell which was named. The bells themselves are used to the isolation. John Bell is a practical man, broad-shouldered, slow-spoken, with a way of scanning the horizon as though weighing every cloud. His wife, Lucy, manages the home with a kind of efficiency born from necessity. There's no store to run to if a loaf burns or a hinge breaks. Their children range from small enough to hide behind a chair to old enough to help in the fields, their laughter carrying across the clearing like the ringing of tin. You pass the cornfield, stalks already tall enough to form green corridors, and step into the edge of the woods. The soil here is darker, cooler underfoot, scattered with leaves that have been crushed into silence. A woodpecker hammers somewhere far off, its rhythm steady, deliberate. It's the kind of sound you expect to end, but it keeps going till you realize you've started matching your pace to it. Historians still argue whether the land the Bell settled on had a particular local reputation, or whether the ghost story grew from unrelated incidents stitched together over time. There's no clear record of hauntings before the family arrived. Later accounts suggest older settlers might have avoided this specific patch by afternoon. The mist has burned away and the heat hangs like a low ceiling. Q can almost hear the sweat forming. The Bell's cabin, shaded by a few stubborn oaks, smells faintly of baked bread and leather oil. Inside, the rooms are simple wood plank floors, a hearth blackened with years of cooking fires, a single table rubbed smooth by elbows and plates. It's quiet, perhaps, if you're the kind of person who listens for irregularities. But for now, this is just a home lived in by people who work hard and sleep deeply. At least, they do now. The nights ahead would teach them that silence can be broken in ways no broom, axe, or rooster can explain. You step back outside as the sun leans toward the horizon. The light shifts, turning the tops of the corn to gold and throwing long shadows across the yard. Somewhere in those shadows, something waits. You can't see it yet. No one can, but it's patient. It knows the Bell family's routines as well as they do, and before long, it will speak, joke, one, come soft. Well, at least if something creepy happens, there's plenty of corn to run into dramatically. The crickets begin their evening chorus, and you feel the first hint of night settling in, pulling the woods and the cabin into a single, listening shape. The Bell family's days fall into a rhythm so steady you could almost mark time by it. Dawn to dusk is for work, and night is for rest, with little in between except for Sunday visits or the occasional neighbor dropping by to exchange seeds or news. The cabin's walls hold the hum of human life, laughter, arguments over chores, the scrape of chairs against the plank floor, but nothing unusual, at least nothing yet that the land rewards their effort. By midsummer, rows of corn stand, high and proud. Beans climb their poles like they're in a race with the sun, and the orchard still young shows the promise of apples in a few years. The Red River runs, not far off, surface broken by darting fish and the occasional heron lifting into the air. Mainstream fact: Robertson County, Tennessee, was still considered frontier land in the early 1800s. Settlers relied heavily on barter, neighborly cooperation, and self-reliance. Homes were often self-built, with every beam, plank, and nail placed by the hands that would live there. Lucy Bell keeps a tidy household. Laundry flaps on the line in the breeze. Quilts are aired out in the sun. And every meal, whether humble cornbread or rabbit stew, comes with a side of her calm presence. The Bell children help where they can. The older boys haul water and split wood. The younger ones collect eggs. A little Betsy Bride, and quick with a gig of laughing trails after her mother or older brothers. Quirky tidbit: in rural Tennessee homes of this time, it wasn't unusual for a company shelf to hold a few nicer plates or mugs kept strictly for guests. The Bells have theirs a small row of cups with a faint blue glaze, rarely touched unless there's someone new at the table. Evenings are their own kind of comfort. John Bell smokes a pipe by the hearth. Lucy mends clothes by candlelight, and the children share stories they've overheard from neighbors or made up themselves. Sometimes, if the night is clear, they step outside to look at the stars, which spill across the sky in more numbers than you could count. There's no lantern glare here. It's nothing to dim the river of light overhead. Historians still argue whether the Bell Witch story should be read as a literal haunting, or as a folktale born from the stresses of frontier life. Some suggest that isolation, superstition, and the eerie quiet of rural nights could have amplified ordinary events into something far stranger in memory. In this quiet, time feels slow. You walk the perimeter of the clearing where the forest presses close, its trees tall and watchful. The scent of pine mingles with the lonely smell of earth, and here and there the undergrowth stirs with unseen movement. A rabbit darts across your path and vanishes into a thicket, leaving the leaves swaying behind it. The Bells have neighbors, but they're scattered. Miles might pass before you see another cabin, and messages travel by word of mouth. It means news arrives like the weather sitting, sometimes stale, sometimes surprising, but in the Bell home. Those early months pass without a single shadow out of place. You stand on the cabin's small porch as the sun dips low. The boards creak under your weight, and you notice how sound carries in this clearing. A shout from the far field is as sharp as if it came from the doorway. Somewhere out there, a wood thrush sings its final notes before night. Joke one nudges in. If this were a horror movie, this is the part where you'd yell at the screen. Everything's fine so far. The The Bell family heads inside the door, closing with a solid thud. Inside, the candlelight flickers against the walls, casting soft halos around the iron nails and wood grain. The fire burns low, a steady glow that turns the logs into deep red coals. It's all perfectly ordinary domestic, even. And yet, you can't shake the feeling that something has been watching long enough to memorize it all. The steady patterns of life here make for easy prediction. When the children sleep, when John leans his rifle by the door, when Lucy snuffs the candles in a few short nights. That knowledge will matter to whatever shares this land. For now, you step back into the cool night air. The sky is vast and black, pinpricked with stars. A thin line of mist curls along the ground near the tree line. The cabin looks sturdy against the dark, but small in the great sprawl of the frontier. The stillness is almost perfect till a lone cricket cuts the silence. Keys pauses, chirps again. You start to hear its rhythm in your pulse, and somewhere in the woods, deeper than that sound, something else might already be listening back. It begins so small you could almost miss it. A single knock against the outer wall, one night, just one. You might think it's a branch shifting in the wind, or maybe one of the hounds brushing past. Right? But when John Bell steps outside, the yard is empty, the dogs are asleep, and the night air is still enough to make your skin notice it. The next night, it's two knocks, slow, deliberate. No creak of footsteps retreating, no rustle in the grass, just the sound itself, and then the blank, unhelpful quiet afterward. It happens again the night after that. Street knocks, mainstream fact. Tapping or rapping sounds are among the most common reported phenomena in haunting accounts worldwide, sometimes explained by wood expansion, rodent movement, or shifting foundations. In the Bell Witch legend, these knocks became the first agreed-upon sign that something was wrong. Inside the cabin, the family tries to ignore it. After all, there's plenty of ordinary noise in a log home to pop up the fire. The sigh of wind through a gap in the chinking. But these knocks aren't random. It's most like they're listening for a response. Quirky tidbit in some Appalachian traditions. A knock on the wall at night was considered a death tap, a bad omen signaling illness or loss, whether the Bells had heard that superstition or not. The repetition was enough to unsettle them. One evening, as Lucy is setting a pot to boil, the knock comes again, this time from the opposite side of the house. John sets down his pipe, grabs a lantern, and circles the cabin. The light sweeps over the split-row fence, the dark line of the corn, the stacked wood pile. Nothing moves. Historians still argue whether these early sounds were exaggerated over time or faithfully remembered. Some accounts mention scratching rather than knocking, or even a sound like chewing. Folklorists point out that such variations often emerge when a story passes through multiple tellers. You sit by the hearth with the Bells that night, the low flame painting the walls in amber. The air inside feels heavy, as if the knocks left something behind when they stopped. The children glance at the windows, dark squares that show only their own reflections. It escalates slowly. The knocks start traveling first along one wall, then another, as if circling the cabin. Sometimes they're faint, like fingers drumming on the wood. Other times they're so sharp you half expect to see splinters. The family begins to dread nightfall. Joke one comes in quietly. Who knew a ghost could keep better time than most drummers? John tries to find a practical cause. He checks the roof, inspects the attic, even sets traps for animals. But the knocks ignore his efforts, changing location as if in mockery. One night, as the family lies in bed, the knocking comes from directly above the headboard. Betsy pulls the quilt to her chin, eyes wide in the dim glow of the dying fire. John sits up, listening hard. The knocks slow, pause, and then tap once, sharply, as if to confirm you're still paying attention. Outside, the woods look harmless under the moonlight. But inside, each knock feels like the cabin is being introduced to someone you can't see. By the end of the week, no one in the Bell household can pretend it's just the wind. Something core someone wants them to hear. It, and the hearing, is only the beginning. The first time it speaks, it doesn't try words. It chooses distance. A breathy thread drifts down from the loft, softer than the kettle hiss, a little rough at the edges, as if it had to push through dry boards and dust before it could reach you. At first, you're not even sure it's sound. You think maybe it's the aftermath of the knocking, the way ears ring after a bell, but then it curls at the end, like a question. You glance up. The rafters say nothing you can see. The children hear it too. You can tell by the way Betsy's eyes track the ceiling instead of the door. By the way, the older boys press their mouths into thin lines and pretend they heard nothing. Lucy's hand pauses over her mending needle, frozen midair, as if the thread has found a knot. John shifts in his chair, the bones of it complaining, and listens the way a man listens for weather. Head tilted, jaw set, waiting to be convinced. It comes again, not a knock, more like a syllable that forgot to grow a word. Hello, huh? That travels across the loft and stops above the hearth. It hangs there for a breath, then dissolves in the clatter of a log collapsing into coals. No one speaks. It's quiet, feels like a held plank, arms tired, waiting for a signal to lower. Mainstream fact. In the earliest written versions of the Bell Witch legend, especially those attributed to local chroniclers in the late 19th century, presence is said to have progressed from knocks and rustles to unmistakable speech, eventually addressing family members by name and holding conversations with visitors. That night, the whispers multiply. It's not constant, just enough to snip the thread of anyone's sleep right when it catches. A soft scrape of syllables from the corner above the bed. A hushed peace near the door latch. Once, the faintest giggle of papery sound, like dry leaves shaken in cupped hands. You feel your skin learn a new kind of listening. You hear wit, the surface of your arms. John does what practical men do. He lights the lantern, climbs the ladder to the loft, and sweeps it under the eaves. The light throws angled shadows across the crossbeams, highlights old spiderwork, draws the smooth ribs of the roof like a whale's bones. There's nothing but dust, rope, a spare quilt, the family's chest of linens, and yet the sound tracks him. When he shifts left, it tugs right. When he stops, it stops too, as if to avoid being caught in the beam. Quirky tidbit: people around the Red River country told of rafter voices long before anyone used the name Bell Witch had breezes that turned barn lofts into mouths, or the trick of a hoot owl's call bouncing inside a roof so it sounded like a woman whispering. Old-timers would clap their hands sharply just once and listen. If the whisper clapped back, they'd say a raccoon was up there, and if it didn't, they'd stop talking about it. You lie awake as the cabin breathes around you. The fire settles in on itself. The dogs outside snore with the honest rhythms of animals that don't question their own sleep. Somewhere, a barred owl calls and waits for an answer. The whisper answers, but not to the owl. A little spill of sound runs from rafter to rafters, S like someone reminding you of a name you already know. By morning, the family pretends to be rested. The day doesn't tolerate drama. Spread to set, stock to water, rows to hoe. But even outdoors, the memory of that sound clings like humidity. You walk the fence line and keep catching yourself glancing up. Habit has your eyes hunting rafters that aren't there. It ramps up when the sun drops. You can feel the room tighten as dusk takes the last color out of the walls. The whispers start earlier now, before the candle is fully lit, as if they dislike the moment when day flips to the smaller light. They seem to favor certain places to crossbeam over the hearth. The corner where the loft ladder meets the floor. The seam where two logs didn't marry perfectly and left a slim, breathing gap. Historians still argue whether the voice accounts were embroidered by later storytellers eager to sell pamphlets and books, or whether multiple witnesses across time truly heard recognizable speech. Skeptics point to drafty construction, amplifying rodents, or wind. Believers note that neighbors and travelers allegedly heard it too, even without prompting. The record is a patchwork quilt. You can feel the stitches if you run your fingers over it. That third night, it says a word. Not a sentence, one word. Chewed like a seed. John. Drawn out in a way that makes it hard to tell if the voice is mocking or very far away. John Bell freezes, pipe halfway to his mouth, ash about to spill into his lap. He doesn't answer. The word repeats, this time higher, as if the rafters lifted it with both hands. Jan. The vowels graze the timber and scatter. Lucy does what women like Lucy do. She claims the floor back from fear. Children, she says. Tone even. Will. Pray. They bowed their heads. The prayer is simple bread. Safety, health, patience, and the whisper sows itself silent, at least until the amen. Then, as if impressed by the pause, it exhales. Not quite laughter. Not quite a side joke. One is the kind you tell inside your skull. If I'm being reviewed by the rafters, at least like feedback in full sentences. You spend the next day listening at the edges of things. At the well, when the bucket hits water, the echo rises as if the well wants a turn to speak. At the cornfield, wind finger combs through the tassels with a shishi that feels suspiciously like stage whisper practice. The woods have always made noise. Your mind just suddenly owns a magnifying glass. But the night's voice doesn't need a magnifying glass. It's getting bolder on its own. In the evening, visitors stop by. Neighbors have a nose for oddness, and sound travels faster than horses sometimes. They sit at the table, hats in laps, trying to look like they just happened to be passing. Betsy hides behind Lucy's skirt and watches their eyes flick up, then away. It doesn't take long. While the story's being told, harvest, fences, whether the loft interrupts. It's not loud, just there, few syllables stitched under the talk. Like a seam line you can't unsee. The neighbor's voice falters, then picks up again, a notch too loud, pretending he didn't hear. He heard. Everyone did. Mainstream fact. Accounts from the period insist that outsiders, local clergy, curious farmers, even a schoolmaster came to the Bell home and experienced phenomena themselves. Some reported hearing a voice answer questions, recite scripture, or mimic people in the room. When the neighbors leave, they do it the way people leave a graveyard, a step faster than dignity wants, one hand already on the gate. In the lane, they'll tell each other it's drafts, it's mice, it's a child playing tricks. Back in their cabins, with the knocks starting on their own walls. Yes, rumors say it followed some of them home. They'll remember how the whisper said John, like it was tasting a story it had waited a long time to tell. That night, you lie on the pallet near the hearth and measure the space between sounds. The whisper has learned timing. It waits until the logs settle, until the last pin drops from Lucy's hair, till the smallest bell's breath falls into that deep trough children find. Then it moves. It's like a soft-footed thing that knows board's complaints by heart. It crosses from the ladder corner to the hearth and back. When the heat chefs, it lifts a breath and rides it. At the top of the climb, it says Bet and stops, as if the rest of the name burned its tongue. Betsy flinches in her sleep, fingers clutching the quilt. Quirky tidbit. Later tellings claimed the voice sometimes sang snatches of him, Tunzovki, on purpose, or told gossip before it reached the road. Whether that's frontier, telephone, or theatrical haunting depends on the teller. There's a rumor it once repeated a sermon word for word that had been preached 10 miles away that morning. Memory, mimicry, something else. The rafters don't submit affidavits. You've learned to keep your eyes down when sound climbs, looking up only courts shadows, and shadows are cheap coin in a log cabin at night. Instead, you focus on the seam between floorboards, on the little knot that looks like an eye near the door's lower hinge. On the way, candlelight makes a lake of the table's smoothest plank. The whisper seems to respect not being stared at. It grows less coy. Cold, it says, and you feel it the way the air drops half a notch at your ankles. The hearth hasn't changed. Your skin has cold. Another lap across the rafters. Cold. The word is less a report and more a taste test of the room. Historians still argue whether these reported early words emerge from later transcriptions, pending memory, toward, narrative after all. A haunting with vocabulary is more sellable than a haunting that only knocks. But then there's the sheer volume of consistent claims about names and simple statements. If a community decides together to hear a voice, do they create one? Or does the voice conscript them? Choose your philosophy. The rafters will let you keep it. John tries questions, because men ask questions at things that won't go away. Who are you? The whisper doesn't answer. What do you want? The rafters draft a breeze that lifts the candle flame until it gutters, then settles again. The word want returns, just the one, with a little edge like a burr along it. Want. The kids don't move. Their bodies have decided that stillness equals survival. Lucy tries prayer again. The voice is courteous enough to quiet during scripture. This will matter later and then. Like a child who waited its turn, it tosses a word into the space after amen. Ma'am, ma'am, not ma'am, ma'am, not quite mocking, not quite reverent. An echo that couldn't decide which mouth it borrowed it from. Lucy's face does not change. A woman like her can shell peas in a storm. Joke 2 drifts through your head because tension demands tribute. If the rafters are going to talk, they could at least announce themselves like proper guests and wipe their feet on a cloud. Days acquire a soundtrack. You start to hear the whisper. In places it isn't, and then in places it is. At the spring, where the water slips over stone with a consonant tucked in it. In the cornrows, where tassels rub and make a sibilant is long enough to pass for thought. It's oppressive, not because it never stops, but because it could begin at any moment. Anticipation is a discipline of its own. The family learns it fast. When the voice finally strings two words together, you're not ready, even though you thought you were. It picks the hour when even candles give up fairness and burn unevenly. The house has settled into that late quiet where you can hear people swallow. From the corner above the ladder comes, no, John, like a correction, like an answer to a rule you haven't heard yet. John sits forward. The line repeats, slightly lower. No, John. A third time, higher again, which makes the words feel weirdly three-dimensional, as if they're trying on bodies. No one asks, no one, not tonight. It's enough that it can refuse. Permission has a new rider. You want to climb the ladder and stick your head into the roof's ribcage and tell the whisper that rooms are for people, that rafters, by tradition, hold roofs, not tongues. But you've learned something else already. The cabin does not respond to scolding. Kate responds to attention. And the thing in the rafters has an attention span you cannot outstare. Joke 3. Bone dry. Great. The house came with a narrator and no off switch. By the fifth night, the whisper knows everyone's names. Not all at once stitched over hours, like initials on cloth, says Lucy with a softness the others don't get, says Betsy, like a coin clinked on a counter. Quick, bright, deliberate. It says John the way it did the first time, drawn out, inflected, tasting. For the boys, it uses nicknames only the family uses in the yard, which means it either listens during the day or possesses a profoundly good memory for eavesdropped talk. Neither option feels comfortable. Mainstream fact. Multiple sources insist the entity addressed visitors by name without introduction and repeated details. It couldn't have learned through ordinary means, whether through coincidence, cueing, or something stranger is the open question folklorists pull apart and never finish. Neighbors come again, some with Bibles, some with bravado. The whisper treats both the same. If a verse begins, it hushes. If boasting starts, it borrows the last boast and whispers it back, fractionally wrong, which is somehow worse than mockery. You watch the bravest men in the district become careful with pronouns. The voice likes to repeat I and mine with a curl at the end that makes the words look cheap. People start saying we a lot in this cabin. When morning finally pries up the night, you step into the yard and look at the roofline. It's ordinary shingles, a handful of frost, a jay on the ridgepole scolding a world that forgot breakfast. You listen, just in case the voice hitchhiked out with the light. It doesn't. It waits indoors, where the geometry of wood and air gives it a throat. You know the shape of the hours ahead. Work, chores, a watchful quiet that feels like placing a glass upright on a table and standing ready to catch it if the table trembles. You also know something else. The whisper has crossed a line. Names are invitations and leashes. The room has learned yours. What it will do with them is a story already walking toward you from the edge of the woods, hands in its pockets, humming a hymn it doesn't quite have the key for. It waits until you're nearly asleep before it touches the covers. One moment you're in that soft drift where your thoughts have given up structure, and the next there's the faintest tug. Not enough to uncover you, just enough to prove it. Can't. The quilt slides a finger's width down, pauses, then smooths itself back into place, like someone decided to tuck you in after all. Betsy stirs in the bed across the room. She whispers, a small mama, but Lucy's breathing is steady. She's still deep in sleep. The rafters hold their tongue tonight. Whatever's moving chooses silence, letting you strain against the quiet with every muscle in your body. The next night, it's not so polite. The covers shift in little jerks, back and forth, until your hand finds the edge and holds on. You're ready to call out, but the movement stops as if your grips spoiled the fun. Then, just as you think it's over, the mattress dips slightly, but enough that you feel the give beneath you. A weight you can't see settles near your feet for a breath or two before lifting again. Mainstream fact. Many haunting traditions include reports of bed disturbances, pulling sheets, pressing mattresses, or cold spots where a body isn't. In the Bell Witch legend, Betsy was particularly singled out for such nightly harassment. Betsy doesn't hide her fear well. By the third night, she's clutching her quilt before she even lies down, knuckles white under the flicker of the candle. Lucy hums softly while she braids Betsy's hair, but the hum can't cover the way her eyes keep sliding toward the loft. John says nothing. His silence is becoming its own piece of furniture in the room. Heavy and always there. Quirky tidbit in rural Tennessee at the time. Bed ropes were tightened nightly with a wooden key to keep the mattress firm. The Bell's bed ropes are always taut, but one morning they find them mysteriously slack, as if someone or something decided everyone should sleep in a sag. Historians still argue whether these physical encounters were exaggerated later to heighten the drama, or whether multiple witnesses really saw bedding move without visible cause. Some skeptics point to restless legs or sleep paralysis. Others note that the reports include movements witnessed by fully awake onlookers. You take to watching the blankets instead of sleeping. Candlelight makes a small island in the room, and you focus on the way the light catches the weave of the fabric. For a while, nothing. Then a ripple. Not from you, not from wind. The shutters are closed, but from some precise pinch of air. It travels down towards your feet and vanishes. The boys have their own stories. One wakes to find his pillow missing entirely, discovered later propped against the hearth. Another claims something tugged his hair hard enough to sting while he lay on his stomach. They start insisting on sleeping in their day clothes, boots nearby, as if ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. Joke 1 slides in, because your mind refuses to let the tension go unmocked. At this point, even the laundry line gets more privacy than we do. One evening, as Lucy smooths the bed for the night, she murmurs a prayer, not the out-loud kind, just lips moving without sound. The quilt flips itself up at one corner. It's not far, just enough to prove it's listening. Lucy's hand stills on the fabric, but she finishes the prayer. The quilt falls back into place like it lost interest. The more it happens, the more it feels deliberate. This isn't random movement, it's timed. It waits until everyone is quiet, until the fire is nothing but embers and the last log has stopped its little sighs. Then it makes itself known. Historians still argue whether these acts of interference were malicious or playful. Some versions of the story claim the witch occasionally tucked people in warmly, even after a night of torment, as if the cruelty came with a strange streak of caretaking. One night, you're certain it's standing right beside you close enough to feel the faint pull of cold air on your cheek. The covers tighten around your legs, like someone running their palm across the quilt to smooth it. A second later, the cold vanishes, replaced by the usual warmth of the cabin. By now, everyone in the Bell household knows the night is not theirs alone. Sleep has become a negotiation, and the thing they're negotiating with never actually signs the agreement. The worst is when you wake to find the quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed, your body exposed to the cool air. The fold is too straight, too precise, more like housework than a prank. The rafters remain silent, as if the act speaks for itself. Joke 2, whispered only to yourself. Nice of the ghost to handle the linens, but next time, maybe sweep days begin to feel shorter. Chores stack up because nights no longer bring rest. Everyone moves slower, as if their bones are heavy. And through it all, the cabin still looks perfectly ordinary from the outsider. It's a tidy little farmstead with nothing to betray what happens once the lamps go out. One evening, the tugs grow bolder. Betsy's quilt is yanked halfway off before she can grip it. She cries out, and John bolts upright, shouting into the dark for whatever's there to show itself. The only answer is the sound of fabric dropping onto the floor. Quirky tidbit. Some tellings insist that the witch's nighttime disturbances could be calmed briefly by reciting psalms aloud. Others claim she grew bored with scripture and would interrupt mid-verse just to prove she could. That night ends without further trouble, but no one really sleeps. You lie in the half-dark, watching the ceiling, waiting for the next pull. It doesn't come, and somehow that's worse. It's not gone. It's waiting for the moment when your guard slips. Joke 3 arrives thinly, without much humor left in it. If this is a hospitality service, the customer satisfaction score is going to tank. When morning comes, the quilts are in place, the beds look untouched, and you could almost convince yourself it was all a dream. Almost, but the family's eyes say otherwise. They've learned something new. The covers are never entirely theirs, and sleep will never again belong solely to the sleepers. By now, you've learned that the Bell Witch, if you even want to call it that yet, likes variety. Knocks, whispers, tugged, covers. It cycles through them like a musician trying different instruments. Tonight, though, it picks something you weren't prepared for. The hair. It starts with Betsy again. She jerks awake in the low light, her hands flying to her scalp. It's pulled me, she whispers, voice sharp in the quiet. You see her, brad normally neat from Lucy's careful. Hands half undone, a few strands sticking at odd angles. She's breathing fast, the way you do after a bad dream. Except she wasn't dreaming. Mainstream fact. In the most widely told versions of the Bell Witch legend, Betsy suffered repeated hair-pulling episodes, sometimes severe enough to leave her crying in pain. Witnesses supposedly saw her hair lift or twist as if gripped by invisible fingers. You're still watching her when it happens to one of the boys. He's rolling over, half asleep, when his head jerks back with a sharp awe. He spins, glaring at the brother beside him. But the space between them is wide and empty. The rest of the night is a tangle of startled gasps and muttered curses, PG-rated ones. The Bells are church-going, after all. No one sees a hand, but the movements are too sudden, too precise to blame on chance. Quirky tidbit on the frontier. There was an old belief that cutting a lock of someone's hair without their consent could give you control over them, a superstition tied to both folk healing and hexing. Whether the witch was playing with this idea or just enjoying the reactions, no one could say. Historians still argue whether these accounts were literal or theatrical embellishments. Some point to static electricity rear, but possible on cold, dry nights, while others suggest mischievous children could have staged it. But staging hair yanks in the dark, in front of family and neighbors, without being caught, that's harder to explain away. You lie still, hoping to avoid notice, but that hope doesn't last. There's a sudden, unmistakable tug at the crown of your head, not hard enough to hurt, but sharp enough to jolt you fully awake. It's followed by a light, almost playful flick at the ends of your hair, like someone testing its texture. Betsy's patience cracks before anyone else's. Leave me alone, she shouts into the dim loft space. For a moment, the rafters seem to listen. Then, from somewhere above, a faint, mocking giggle. Joke one pushes in. Bone dry. Great. Now the ghost's a hairdresser. Next week, it'll be offering PERMS. The next morning, Lucy tries to undo the damage with a comb, but she finds knots where knots shouldn't be. Tight, twisted little tangles, as if someone sat in the dark all night, idly twisting strands around unseen fingers. John doesn't say much. You catch him standing outside later, hat in hand, staring at the cabin roof, as if wondering how many more nights his family can take. That evening, you all go to bed earlier than usual. Not because you're tired, but because you'd rather get it over with. The witch doesn't wait long. First, a few gentle tugs here and there, more teasing than attack. Then, without warning, Betsy lets out a cry that shoots you upright. She's clutching her head, eyes brimming with tears. In the weak lamplight, you can see her braid almost fully unraveled, strands sticking out like she's been running through brambles. Mainstream fact. Some eyewitness accounts claim Betsy's hair was pulled so violently that it lifted her partially off her bed. Whether that's truth or tall tale, the image stuck hard in the folklore. Lucy moves quickly, sitting on the bed and gathering her daughter in her arms. You can't have her, she says softly but firmly to the empty air. The rafters answer with a creak, not from settling wood, but from something shifting its weight up there. Quirky tidbit in certain English folk stories brought over by settlers. Malicious spirits who pulled hair was said to be appeased by leaving out a ribbon or comb as an offering. The Bells never tried a tour. If they did, no one recorded the result. Historians still argue whether the witch's focus on Betsy was random or deliberate. Some speculated targeted her youth and vulnerability. Others suggest she became the center of the story because her experiences were the most dramatic. You think about the cold, about the whisper that once said "bet" and stopped, about how names seem to hold weight here. You wonder if each hair pulled is a way of saying, "I know who you are." Later that night, when the last lamp is out, the tugs change. They're slower now, more deliberate, almost like braiding in reverse. You lie there, every muscle locked, letting it happen. because stopping it would mean touching what isn't there. Joke 2 barely takes the edge off if it starts offering beard trims. I'm moving by dawn. Everyone's hair looks like they've slept in a gale. The combs will be busy all morning, but no one talks about it at breakfast. Talking about it only makes the next night come faster, and the next night will come. Word gets out the way. Wood smoke, dust threading through trees, hitching rides and chores, arriving at doorways before anyone knocks. First, it's a rumor with splinters in it. The bells hear things. Stands a story with teeth. The bells have a voice in their rafters. Curiosity is a horse that saddles itself, and soon visitors start appearing up the lane with expressions carefully arranged to say, "We're just passing by," which fools exactly no one. They come in 2s and 3s, a neighbor and his grown son, a couple who bring a basket of cornbread as if hospitality can bribe the invisible, a schoolmaster, stiff with purpose and skepticism that can be measured by the shine on his shoes. Hats are doffed, introductions made, careful glances traded that skip like stones over the surface of the real reason they're here. Lucy puts on water, because in this county, water solves everything from thirst to nerves. John keeps his face neutral, the way men do when pride and dread have to share a room. Mainstream fact. Long after the supposed events, 1817 to 1821, multiple recollections in regional histories claim that clergy, teachers, and prominent locals visited the bell, home to witness disturbances, audible voices, moving objects, and accurate recitations of scripture, contributing to the legend's reach beyond the immediate neighborhood. Visitors sit, bodies arranged just a hair too straight on the chairs, eyes flicking once to the loft before they remember their manners and aim at the hearth. The cabin is cleaned to a kind of hopeful neatness. Beds smoothed, quilts tucked, tobes put away, as if hiding hair tools could discourage hair crimes. Betsy stays near Lucy, posture small but steady. You'll find a spot where you can see the ladder and the door at the same time. Vigilance learns geometry fast. At first, nothing. The kettle mutters. The dogs outside exchange the sort of sleepy barks that mean we're still dogs, just not ambitious ones. The visitors ask ordinary questions. Harvest, weather, hog prices, if politeness can smoke a spirit from its hole. Then, a laced-in whisper descends from the rafters and slides along the beam like a fingertip. A good day. It is neither loud nor shy. It's a person at the edge of a doorway, deciding how much of themselves to show. The schoolmaster's eyebrows go up, which is the frontier equivalent of fainting. He clears his throat. Who speaks? Silence, which has lately learned to be dramatic, holds court. Then, a neat mimicry of the schoolmaster's not his words, just his hesitation set back down in the room like a borrowed hat. The visitors glance at one another. It's not the knocking anymore. This is a someone with a taste for company. The neighbor's son grins to prove he isn't rattled. Say my name, then, he challenges. The voice doesn't hurry, savors the pause until even the grin looks heavy, then says his given name, with the drawl his own mother uses when he's in minor trouble. The grin evaporates. He mutters, "Well now," which is the county's formal concession of surprise. Quirky tidbit, one later account insists. The voice could imitate anyone in the district perfectly down to a lisp, a cough, or a favorite oath. People said it once sang to him parts at once, then switched to a third mid-verse just to show it could. If true, that's either virtuosity or mischief in a choir robe. You learn the voice has preferences. If someone opens a Bible, the sound thins to a respectful hush, as if it's stepping back to let the words through. When the final amen lands, it steps forward again with a quick amen of its own, too brisk to be pious, too prompt to be mockery. It quotes lines from the sermon the minister gave last Sunday 3 settlements over. The minister, who has come armed with faith and a backbone. Stares like a man who just met his echo, traveling alone. Historians still argue whether these precise recitations reflect a phenomenon or a community's shared performance suggestion, cueing and the human tendency to polish memory until it shines. Skeptics point to ventriloquism and mass expectation. Believers counter with the stubborn insistence of multiple tellers whose details align more tightly than chance should allow. The archive doesn't rule. It shrugs and invites you to pick a camp. Not every visitor is polite. One man, mean-fearful in the way of people who make a hobby of doubt, stands under the loft and yells, "Come down here, if you're so bold." The air cools an inch. The voice doesn't descend. It drops 3 pebbles from somewhere in the raptor's tiny ticks on the table, measured, unmistakable. The man flinches, then stomps around the room, banging on logs, insisting there must be hollow spots. There are. Cabins are wood and air and accident, but the pebbles do not care. They have already landed. Joke 1. Private and small. Bold is free until gravity gets involved. John tries to keep order, the way a father does when company is over and the house itself has opinions. "No shouting," he says, gently as he can, and the room obeys him enough to make you think authority still works here, sometimes. The voice takes to answering questions, if asked without swagger. "Who are you?" Gets nothing. "Did you come far?" Earns back a wisp of sound like wind through pine. That could be metaphor or weather. The room doesn't label it. Someone proposes experiments because people will eventually reach for a yardstick in a thunderstorm. The schoolmaster writes a word on a slip of paper, folds it, and puts it in his pocket. He demands the voice read it. The voice says nothing because it has taste. Then it recites the schoolmaster's wife's recipe for berry preserves instead, including the part where she always adds a pinch of salt she later denies. The schoolmaster goes the color of preserves, does not remove the paper from his pocket. Another visitor suggests tying a ribbon to the loft beam and asking the voice to move it. He's thinking like a stage magician, setting a test. The ribbon hangs in the still air, stubborn. The voice, uninterested in being turned into a parlor trick, says the visitor's childhood nickname instead, the one he has not heard aloud since. His grandmother died. Kaya sits down too fast and apologizes to the chair. The ribbon declines to be useful. Asterisk mainstream fact. As the Bell Witch tale spread, gather proof seems the way magnets gather filings desks with Bibles, folded, notes, or moved objects each, told later with the conviction of witnesses trying to staple a cloud to a page. Whether the tests happened as described or evolved in the retelling, they became part of the legend's internal logic. Evening slides toward night, the hour when everyone learns what patience is for. The visitors, now subdued into the kind of quiet normally reserved for funerals and newborns, wait. The voice, evidently fond of theater, chooses this moment to wander the room. It brushes the door latch. Click. It breathes across the candle, just enough to flutter the flame without killing a practice in restraint you wish the human world would copy. It hovers above the boy's bed and whispers the punchline of a joke they told each other in the pasture. Last week, the boys go rigid, mortified that their private dumbness has gone public. Asterisk, you notice how it treats Lucy? If she addresses it, never rudely. Never. Bargaining the voice's edges soften as if heat were added. It will admit cold, or sleep, or tired in that papery tone. One-word confessions that never invite follow-up. It does not tug Lucy's hair. It does not touch her covers. Okay, you file that away. Even hauntings observe some version of manners. Quirky. Sidelight. An outlying strand of the legend claimed the voice once complimented Lucy's cooking, specifically a ham cured to perfection, and even left an apple as tribute. The apple had teeth marks when found. Whether that's frontier, comedy, or evidence is for your appetite to decide. Asterisk, of course. Someone asked it the question that lives under all the others. Why are you here? The answer arrives as a cadence, not a sentence, the syllables of a woman's name, broken and rearranged until they feel like a riddle. It is the first time the presence points toward identity without hiding behind borrowed voices. It may be the first time it enjoys being asked when the night stretches long enough to fray courtesy. Visitors begin to drift toward farewell. Hats are reclaimed. Awkward assurances are made. Cornbread baskets are left behind as if starch could guard a threshold. At the door, the voice speaks each name in turn, soft, accurate, final, as if to sign the ledger of who came, who saw, who will have explaining to do on the walk home. Outside, in the lane, people do what people do. They negotiate their story. It was the wind, says one. It was ventriloquism, says another, unwilling to specify whose mouth did the trick. It knew my grandmother's tune, admits a third, then swallows the rest. The dark has learned to sound like a lobby. Some report that the voice follows. Not far, just a bend in the road, the part where the cornfield blocks the cabin from view. A last whisper says a name or an old pet phrase, and then shuts itself neatly as a book. These visitors will either never come again or will come again too often. There's no middle dot joke to leans in. Congratulations, you've unlocked a premium haunting. Unfortunately, the free trial follows you to the gate. Days after, the visitors' households volunteer their own anomalies. A knock on a wall that never knocked before. Spoon fallen from a shelf no one touched. A half-heard word in the rafters. That sounds like someone practicing your name with a new mouth. Word grows a spine, leaves the farm and finds roads. Historians still argue whether we are watching a haunting spread or a story colonize. Communities transmit sensation as readily as news. Once a district learns to expect a voice, it is astonishing how often a voice is found. But then a visiting minister writes later that he heard the thing sing harmony to a psalm he was humming under his breath, a tune he swears he hadn't used in years. And you remember that analysis is very good at explaining the temperature of water while you're still busy drowning on a duskly Sunday. A traveling preacher arrives uninvited, led by conviction or curiosity's horse. One cannot say. He prays aloud in a voice that is cut through 100 camp meetings. The house listens. He finishes. The voice, patient to a fault, says the preacher's hometown. Then the name of his first teacher. Then the line of scripture he always forgets and hides by flipping pages fast. The preacher closes his eyes and says, Lord, in a tone that includes both petition and apology. Doesn't stay for cornbread. Joke 3. Size of a splinter. You came for an exorcism and got an audit. What changes after the visitors come? Isn't the quantity of strangeness so much as its confidence? The voice seems to enjoy an audience. It learns, pacing like a storyteller, derives a breath sooner than you expect, or waits a breath longer, just to test your nerves. It keeps names like tokens and spins them with flair. And always, it counts you among the listeners, not in mercy, but with the assurance of a host who knows that, for now, you will keep taking your seat. When the last visitor of the week steps off the porch and the latch settles, the room exhales. It's the kettle, which has been forgotten into silence, remembers it can murmur. It's Betsy, hair near tamed again, leans into Lucy's shoulder. John stares at the loft and looks, older by a line around the eyes. You feel the new shape of the house room that is no longer private. It's a ceiling that will not stop being a mouth. A story that now belongs to more people than can fit at this table. The presence, satisfied with its work, falls quiet for a while. Then, just before the candle gutters, it says one more word, the syllables crisp as an apple's first bite. Soon, you look at the ladder, the loft, the dark ribs of the roof. Soon, is a big country. The night lays its map on the table and waits for someone to point. You don't have to wait long to learn what soon means. It begins with the livestock. A farmer's life runs on the steady heartbeat of animals' hands clucking at dawn. The mule stamping a slow rhythm in the stall, milk warm in the pail before the sun fully claims the yard. When those rhythms falter, the whole place feels off-kilter. One morning, the rooster doesn't crow. That's not unusual sometimes. They just don't feel like being leaders. But when you step outside, the hens are pressed to the corners of the coop, feathers puffed in a nervous tremor. The feed sits untouched. Even the mule turns its head away from you, eyes rolling white as if something's been pacing the fence. All night mainstream fact in many Bell Witch accounts. The disturbances spread beyond the house to the farmyard animals acting skittish, refusing to eat, or breaking into a panicked run for no visible reason. In rural communities, this was often taken more seriously than human complaints. Animals don't fake nerves for drama. John finds the pigpen gate unlatched. The pigs haven't escaped. They're huddled in the far corner, silent. That's wrong. Pigs are chatty, opinionated creatures. Quiet pigs mean trouble. He bolts the gate, checks the fence line. No tracks. No signs of a predator. Quirky tidbit. Old frontier superstition claimed that if your animals suddenly went silent and bunched together, it meant a witch wind had passed an invisible gust, carrying a person's ill will or a spirit's attention. Some would burn cedar to clear it. Others would whisper the Lord's Prayer over the barn door. Historians still argue whether these animal accounts are literal, symbolic, or just the natural result of human anxiety bleeding into how they interpreted animal behavior. Skeptics suggest nocturnal predators prowling nearby could unsettle livestock without leaving visible signs. Believers counter with how often the animals calmed the moment they were moved away from the bell. Property. You watch Lucy scatter grain for the hens, her hands moving steady even though her eyes flick to the trees every few seconds. The hens finally begin to eat, but they do it in burst, speck, pause, stare like something in the woods is counting their movements. That night, the dogs won't come to the porch. Usually, they plant themselves by the door, a furry trip hazard for anyone stepping out, okay? Now, they sit at the far edge of the yard, hackles lifted, staring toward the house as if it's the thing to watch. When John calls them, they slink closer, but refuse to cross an invisible line halfway in. Joke 1 drifts through your mind despite yourself. Always nice when even the dogs think the house is haunted. The next morning, a milk pail tips over on its own. Not a knock from a passing boot, just a deliberate shove that leaves a silver arc of milk across the packed dirt. Lucy mutters a soft enough under her breath. The voice doesn't answer, but from somewhere near the barn roof, a single tap sounds on wood, like a knuckle rapping once to acknowledge receipt of a message. John tries to get ahead of it. He walks the property line, muttering as he goes, not prayers, exactly, but a farmer's inventory. Fence post, gate latch, water trough, stone marker. He taps each with the handle of his hoe, as if reasserting ownership by naming things out loud. The presence stays quiet during his rounds, but the air feels heavier, like someone watching a game they don't intend to play yet. By midweek, the mule refuses to pass the well. It plants its hooves and leans back hard enough to creak the harness. When they lead it another way, it shies again at the corner of the cornfield, ears pinned flat. There's nothing there but wind moving to tassels, yet the mule trembles like it hears something you can't. Mainstream fact. Multiple witnesses in the Bell Witch legend describe their horses or mules reacting violently to unseen forces bucking, freezing, or bolting. In one telling, a team of oxen refused to move until the cart was turned completely away from the Bell property. One evening, you're walking back from the far pasture when you hear it hooves in the dirt, not yours. You stop. The sound stops. 2. You start again, slower. This time, The steps follow for 3 beats before fading like someone walked backward into the dark, quirky sidelight in some versions of the tale. Neighbors claim to hear phantom hoofbeats that stopped abruptly, even on soft ground that should have left no echo. Theories ranged from ghost riders to the witch, self-moving unseen between farms. Historians still argue whether these details are part of a contagion effect, where people add their own experiences once a story gains momentum or whether the phenomenon genuinely extended beyond the house into the land. That night, dogs barked toward the barn for hours, throats raw by dawn. When John checks, the barn doors are open just wide enough for a person to slip in sideways. Nothing's missing. The animals inside are untouched, but staring at the gap. He shuts it and drives a wedge under the latch. Joke 2. Thin, but serviceable. The ghost isn't stealing anything, sprousing. The air in the yard feels different now. Not worse, exactly, but watchful. You catch yourself glancing over your shoulder on the way to the outhouse, half expecting to see movement where the shadows shift. When you don't, it's almost disappointing. Almost. Lucy starts lighting a lamp in the barn each night, leaving it on until the first hint of daylight. For the animals, she says, though you suspect it's for her too. The glow throws strange shadows across the yard, and once you think you see a figure cross between barn and coop. But the dogs don't react, and you're not entirely sure. You didn't imagine it because you wanted something solid to point at by the end of the week. The rhythm of the farm is altered. Milking happens earlier, feeding happens faster, and no one lingers outside after dusk. The livestock settle uneasily. The family settles uneasily. And the Wycliffe, that's who you're dealing with, seems to be learning just how far her reach goes. Joke 3 slides in with a sigh. Next, she'll be in the pantry, rearranging the preserves. You start to understand what soon meant. It wasn't a threat about a specific event. It was a promise that the borders of this thing are going to keep expanding, okay? And from the look in the animal's eyes, you suspect they knew that before you did. The livestock may have been the opening move, but now the house itself starts to feel altered. Not just noisy, not just watch different. It's as if its beams and planks have been persuaded to lean toward something you can't see. It starts with the little things. The chair by the hearth is an inch to the left when you wake, okay? Ladle, you're sure, was on its hook. Now rests on the table. A single shoe only, one turned neatly the opposite direction from the other. These aren't accidents. They have the precision of choices. Mainstream fact. In the Bell Witch accounts, household objects were said to move on their own, sometimes subtly, sometimes with force. Items misplaced or rearranged became one of the story's recurring motifs, often dismissed by skeptics as tricks of memory, but repeated consistently in testimony at first. Lucy assumes the children are playing games. Put it back, she says, the third time the bread knife ends up in the wash basin. But the kids look genuinely baffled, and after the 10th time, she stops asking. Then comes the night the bed covers vanish. Not just yanked off, gone. You and the others wake shivering to find the quilts simply not there. You search the loft, the floor, even outside, thinking maybe some prankster tossed them out a window. Finally, someone spots the folded stack by the hearth. Neat as laundry day, still warm from your body heat. Quirky tidbit. One French version of the legend claims the witch once took every blanket from the house, piled them in the yard, and arranged apples on top for decoration. No other source repeats this, which makes you wonder if it was someone's attempt to give the spirit a sense of humor, or a very specific aesthetic. Historians still argue whether such details were real, exaggerated, for storytelling, or outright inventions layered on later to keep the legend fresh. Some folklorists note that moved objects are a common signifier in haunting tales worldwide. So, their presence in the Bell Witch lore could be as much tradition as truth. It escalates with the dishes. One afternoon, while Lucy and Betsy are kneading bread, 3 tin plates lift from their shelf and clatter one by one to the floor, not dropped from a single slip sequentially, like a bored child drumming with saucers. None dent. All land, face up. Lucy just stands there, hands dusted with flour, watching as if hoping the show has a point. Joke 1. At least it's not breaking the good china. Right. Frontier. There is no good china. By the following week, the activity turns less benign. Chair tips backward, hard enough to send the schoolmaster. How made the mistake of sitting with his arms crossed, scrambling to keep his balance. A spoon darts off the table and lands with its handle in the ashes. Candle sputters out while you're mid-sentence, even though there's no draft. The voice has grown bolder, too. It will narrate what's about to happen. Fall, drop, move, a second before the thing does. The effect is less like magic and more like someone showing off, calling their shots. Mainstream fact. Some bell witch. Stories describe the spirit speaking directly before an action, predicting an object's movement, or sound almost as if to prove control. In the oral tradition, these moments became markers of its intelligence. The oddest episode comes late one night. You're lying awake when you hear a faint scrape above, like something sliding along a beam. Then, without warning, a small, unfamiliar wooden box appears at the edge of the loft, cute, and lands gently on the floor beside your bed. It's empty. When John inspects it by lamplight, he swears he's never seen it before. No one else recognizes it either. The next day, it's gone. Quirky sidelight in one obscure retelling. The witch allegedly fetched objects from unknown sources, delivering them to the bells before making them vanish again. Scholars, who, like concrete explanations, point to the ease with which a human accomplice could sneak items in and out. Others argue the randomness of the objects undermines any practical hoax. Historians still argue whether such gifts were intended as intimidation, mockery, or something stranger in attempt at exchange. Was it giving you something, or was it taking something intangible in return? Joke 2 comes easy. Great, we've got the world's first ghostly DoorDash. One evening, after a particularly loud day of knocks and sliding chairs, John tries speaking directly to it. If you must move things, he says, put them back. There's a pause. Then the bread knife missing since morning slides across the table to rest exactly where it belongs. No other sounds follow. The silence holds until midnight, when a loud thump from the pantry wakes the household. You rush in to find every single jar of preserves stacked into a neat pyramid in the center of the floor. Not broken, not spilled, just moved. Takes half an hour to put them back. By now, everyone has their own coping mechanism. Betsy ignores it as best she can, reading by lamplight until she's too tired to care where her shoes end up. Appease. Mutter challenges into the dark, hoping bravado will keep their nerves in check. Lucy hums softly whenever she feels it near, so her voice can stake a claim to the air. And you start to keep mental count. How many times a day does something shift? How long between? Does it happen more when certain people are in the room? The pattern, if there is one, is elusive. Some days, it's quiet. Others, it feels like the house is a chessboard and you're just pieces being rearranged. Joke 3, whispered, so it doesn't hear. If it starts alphabetizing the pantry, we'll know it's possessed by a librarian. By the month's end, you realize the moving objects are doing more than showing off. They're changing how everyone moves through the house, where you place things, how you sit, what you leave unattended. It's training you, one nudge at a time, to live in a space where ownership is temporary and stillness is negotiable. And somewhere above the loft, in the ribcage of the roof, you can almost feel the witch smiling at the new layout. It's one thing when the house is a little rearranged. It's another when the nights themselves start coming apart at the seams. The first bad one arrives like a thief, You don't notice it until it's already inside. You're half asleep. When you hear the sound, not a knock, not the voice. Slow, deliberate dragging, like someone pulling a heavy sack across the loft floor. The boards groan under the weight, then fall silent, only to start again from another corner. Mainstream fact in the Bell Witch accounts. Some family members reported hearing heavy objects being dragged or dropped in the loft at night, though inspection always found nothing. This detail recurs in several independent tellings, which suggest it was central to the lived experience, or at least to how the family remembered it. You think about waking John, but before you can move, a new sound joins in, a faint, rhythmic tapping against a wall right beside your headboard. Slow to be rain, too steady to be rodents. It's following a beat: 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. Then the voice, low and close, says, "Don't sleep." Joke 1, dark and involuntary. Wasn't planning on it. Thanks. The rest of the house hears it too. Psh. Betsy sits up on her pallet, her eyes reflecting lamplight like an animal's. Lucy grips her quilt tighter, but doesn't move. Okay. No one answers the voice. There's nothing to say. Eventually, the sounds fade, replaced by the distant creak of the barn door shifting in the wind. The next few nights, sleep is a negotiation. Sometimes it gives you an hour before the interruptions begin. Sometimes it starts right away. A tricks. Very footsteps on the stairs that never reach the bottom. Faint whispers from the rafters that dissolve if you strain to catch the words. The sensation of a hand brushing your ankle through the covers. Quirky tidbit. One fringe version claims the witch would sometimes sing old ballads in the dead of night to lull anyone, but to keep them from drifting off. The melodies were reportedly unfamiliar, which either meant they came from the witch's own lifetime or from nowhere at all. Historians still argue whether these reports came from genuine nocturnal disturbances or the natural side effects of living in constant tension, heightened awareness, shared dreams, even mild group hallucinations. What's certain is that once you start expecting to be woken, your body makes sure it happens. One night, you try a test. You lie awake, eyes closed, and imagine you're sleeping. Okay? You listen for the telltale shift in the air. That means it's here. Sure enough, the floorboard beside your bed dips slightly, but enough to feel. You keep still. Something leans close, and in a tone that's almost conversational, it says, "You're awake." Joke 2, tight in your throat. Guess I'm not cut out for spy work. By now, everyone's sleep is fraying. The boys snap at each other over chores. Betsy moves slower in the mornings. Lucy burns a batch of biscuits because she's staring into space while the oven smokes. John tries to pretend it's just the season wearing on folks, but you can see his patience thinning, too. The voice seems to feed on that. Some nights, it plays games, knocking from one end of the house to the other, making you think it's moving fast enough to be in 2 places at once. Other times, it goes still for hours, only to wake you at the very edge of dawn with a single, sharp bang that leaves your heart racing long after the light comes. Mainstream fact. Contemporary descriptions of the bell, which often emphasized its unpredictability, long stretches of calm, followed by sudden, tense activity, something modern paranormal researchers still consider a hallmark of interactive hauntings. The worst is the whispering. It's never loud enough to catch the whole sentence, just fragments. Behind you, still there, won't stop. The temptation to respond is strong, but everyone's learned by now that engaging rarely makes it better. Quirky sidelight. One late 19th century retelling claimed the witch's nighttime whispers occasionally carried gossip from other household affairs. Debts, viewed as though it wandered the county by night and reported back. Whether that's supernatural eavesdropping or an early example of rural tabloid culture is anyone's guess. Historians still argue whether those whispers reflect real sounds or the brain's tendency to piece random noises into speech, but the way they land sharp and too close makes it hard to believe in the moment. Joke 3, muttered into the pillow. If it's going to keep me up, the least it could do is read a book out loud. After a month of broken nights, you start to notice the toll. The candlelight seems dimmer. The air feels heavier. Okay? The faces around the breakfast table, where that pale, thin look people get after long illness. Okay? The house isn't just haunted, it's tired, and it's making you tired too. You catch yourself thinking about how much quieter it would be to sleep in the barn. Then you remember the way the animals have been acting. Okay? And the thought doesn't seem so restful after all. By the end of the week, it's not just a haunting. It's a siege by inches, fought in yawns and slow blinks, in the way hands tremble slightly when pouring coffee. And from the stillness in the rafters, you get the sense the witch knows she's winning this round. If the witch's goal was to grind you all down, the sleepless nights were doing the job. But now she seems to want something else. Conversation. It doesn't happen all at once. First, it's just the occasional word, your name, a short command, a mocking little when someone drops a fork. Okay? Then, one evening, while Lucy is shelling peas by the fire, the voice starts talking in full sentences. Mainstream fact. In many versions of the Bell Witch legend, the entity eventually began speaking clearly and at length, engaging in back-and-forth dialogue with the family and even with visitors. These conversations sometimes ranged from scripture recitation to personal taunts. "You're quiet tonight," says, the sound coming from somewhere near the chimney. No one answers. "I've been to the river. The fish were restless." It's John, who's never been much for indulging games, says. Then you know what a restless man can do with a stick. It's the closest he's come to threatening it, and the silence that follows feels taut. Like ABOWSTRING. Quirky tidbit. One 19th century pamphlet claimed the witch once carried on conversations with multiple people at once, answering questions from different rooms without missing a beat. Skeptics chalked it up to ventriloquism, though no one ever identified a culprit. Historians still argue whether the speaking was part of the original haunting or a later embellishment to make the story more theatrical. The earliest surviving documents mention noises and physical disturbances, but are vague on when the voice first appeared in coherent form. The next night, you decide to try it yourself. You wait until the house is quiet, then say, "Where are you right now?" "Close," it answers immediately, in a tone so casual it's worse than a threat. "Do you want me to prove it?" Joke 1, barely holding your voice steady. "I'd settle for a postcard." Betsy tries next, asking, "Why us?" The reply comes low and almost pitying, "Because you listen." The rest of the night, the voice doesn't speak again. Over the next few days, it grows more talkative. It comments on the weather before dawn, hums snatches of unfamiliar tunes while Lucy cooks, repeats things you said hours earlier word for word just to prove it, remembers. Mainstream fact. One well-known aspect of the Bell Witch legend is its reported ability to mimic voices, sometimes imitating family members so perfectly that others in the house were fooled. The first time, it mimics Lucy. It's unsettling, but almost funny. It repeats her scolding of one of the boys about muddy boots. The second time, it's Betsy's voice calling from outside when Betsy is sitting right beside you. You both freeze, and the voice laughs softly. Quirky sidelight in some folklore traditions. A spirit's ability to imitate a living person's voice was seen as a direct threat to that person's soul, as if speaking in their tone gave it a kind of claim over them, whether the Bells believed that or not. The imitations made them uneasy. Historians still argue whether voice mimicry in such cases is an example of auditory hallucination, misheard echoes, or, if you believe in such things, indication of a truly intelligent haunting. One evening, a neighbor stops by, curious about the stories he's heard. He's halfway through asking John if it's true when the voice cuts in. Yes, Thomas, I know what you did with the hogs, okay? The man pales. Later, John explains that Thomas recently sold a neighbor's pig under suspicious circumstances. No one outside the immediate parties should have known. Joke 2, murmured under your breath. Great. Now it's the county's first investigative reporter. The talking changes the atmosphere. It's not just a haunting now, it's a relationship. Whether anyone wants it or not, you find yourself bracing for commentary whenever you speak, as if there's a third participant in every conversation. Sometimes it's almost civil. Quotes scripture with Lucy, sings hymns with Betsy, recites market prices to John. Other times it's needling, calling out mistakes, pointing out when someone's lying, telling half-finished stories about the old days that trail off into silence before you can ask for more. One night, you press it. Who were you before this? Before what? It asks, as though the question is meaningless. Before here, before us. A pause. Then, I was where I was. It's the most frustrating answer you've ever heard. And the way it drifts off afterward tells you it's exactly the reaction it wanted. Joke 3. Whisper to yourself. Next time, I'm charging it rent if it wants to keep talking. But somewhere in the back of your mind, you realize the talking and knowing, unnerving, relentless sauce makes it harder to pretend this isn't real. No matter how much you wish it would just knocks and bumps in the night. A voice that knows your words, your routines, even your secrets. That's harder to explain away, and it hasn't yet told you what it actually wants. Word of a talking presence in a farmhouse loft travels faster than a wagon on dry road. And in a county where scripture lives closer to the tongue than gossip, it doesn't take long for men of the cloth to start appearing at the bell's door. They come with Bibles wrapped in oilcloth, with voices tuned for creekside revivals, with faces that have seen storms blow through souls and leave clear air behind. They come because this is what they do when rooms won't mind their owners. The first evening a minister arrives, the cabin arranges itself as politely as possible. The hearth is raked, the chairs squared, the quilts smooth, as if housekeeping could persuade the rafters to hold their peace. You find a spot near the ladder where the soft draft from the loft meets the warmer breath of the fire. Betsy sits close to Lucy, fingers twined into the fabric of her skirt. John kneels by the table rather than at it, not from show, but because something about knees on wood feels honest in this house. Mainstream. Fact. Accounts of the Bell Witch from the 19th century repeatedly mention local clergy visiting the farm to pray, read scripture, and question the voice. Some reported hearing responses that quoted Bible passages or mimicked the minister's tone. Fueling the stories spread far beyond Robertson County. The minister opens to Psalms. His cadence is slow and sure, the words laid out like stepping stones across the room. As he reads, the usual whisper thins to nearly nothing, like a creature learning to hold its breath underwater when the amen lands. Hey, the silence lasts one extra heartbeat, then a soft echo from the loft repeats the last line of the psalm perfectly, punctuation and all. The voice's accent has shifted. It's borrowed the minister's own round vowels and careful consonants. He blinks, the way a man blinks when a mirror blinks back. Who are you? He asks, not loud, but with weight. A pause, long enough to count. Psst. Then, from the beam above the hearth, a friend of scripture. Its tone is neither pious nor mocking. It sits somewhere uneasy in between. A chair pulled halfway out from a table. A second minister older, with a burned cedar. Voice comes the next night and tries questions the way a blacksmith tries tongs. Do you confess Jesus Christ? Do you? The voice replies instantly. Same cadence, same gravel. The older man smiles, despite himself. He sparred with hecklers at revivals who weren't half so quick. Hike. He begins to recite the creed. The voice hums harmony off by a hair. just enough to make the skin on your forearms lift. When he finishes, the harmony stops in the middle of a note and dissolves into the loft timbers like steam. Historians still argue whether the clergy's successes or failures in these visits were embroidered after the faxim. Sources insist that the presence fell silent under prayer. Others that it parried scripture with scripture and outlasted every test of orthodoxy, with no contemporary stenographer in the rafters. The record keeps ringing with two conflicting bells. On the third visit, a younger preacher brings paper and charcoal and suggests an experiment. Write a name, the schoolmaster whispers, eager to repeat his folded note trick. But the preacher has something else in mind. He sketches a simple cross on the page, folds it, and slips it into the pocket of his coat. "Tell us what sign I carry," he asks Sierre. The loft does not answer. Instead, a knock runs 3 times along the beam right center, left measured, spare. The preacher removes the paper. The cross has been smudged, just a little, as if a ghostly thumb rested on it while thinking. That could be sweat, charcoal, friction, any earthly cause. But then the voice says the preacher's given name in a tone tender enough to live inside a prayer. Hey? And he sits down without being told. Quirky tidbit. In several retellings, the witch was said to cite specific chapter and verse when challenged, occasionally correcting readers who misquoted, like a walking concordance that enjoyed catching human error. One minister supposedly left, declaring that if the devil himself had come to Sunday school, he'd have to sit in the back for behavior, but would still pass the recitation. Not every encounter favors the voice. On a raw night, when wind chews at the shutters and the dogs refuse the porch, a circuit rider, one of those long road preachers with frost in his beard and iron in his posture, arrives mud-caked, is hungry and more determined than polite. He eats a little, warms his hands, and then stands under the loft with his Bible open to Job. He reads the speeches laid against the whirlwind, the questions from God that unmake human certainty. When he reaches, "Where were you?" the voice above him goes single-note stillness. For a long, cold minute, the only sound in the room is the kettle's sleepy breath. Kia, the circuit rider, closes the book, looks up, and says, "There." He is not invited to stay the night. He was not staying, anyway. But the quiet doesn't hold. Another evening clear, brittle, the kind of night where stars turn to ice chips. The presence shows a different face entirely. It lets the minister pray, lets Lucy hum along, and then turns its attention to John the way a river turns its patience on a rock. "John," it says, as if beginning a letter. "John." The second syllable falls slower, weighted. The room tightens like a rope. For weeks now, the voice has jabbed at everyone, us. But John has borne the brunt without spectacle. Sudden cold against the back of his neck, his hat dropping from its peg as he passes, his name drawn out into the kind of joke that isn't. Tonight, the attention sharpens. The minister kneels. John's chair skids a thumb's width on its own. His pipe on lit rolls, stops, and rolls again to the edge of the table. You see him swallow a curse, church manners holding. The prayer continues. From the loft comes a patient, almost fond sigh. John. Mainstream fact. Most variants of the Bell Witch narrative agree that John Bell, the family patriarch, became the entity's primary target over time, with increasing taunts and afflictions focused on him specifically. Later chapters of the legend would connect this enmity to his illness and death. Kana, those sources disagree on timing and cause. The minister tries to redirect. "Speak to me," he says, inviting the blow toward his own chest. "If you have business, have it here." "I have business," the voice answers, with John. No bravado helps here. John looks smaller than he did yesterday, as if a half hand has been taken off his height. He nods to the minister to continue. The words of prayer march on. Rafters, for once, pace quietly beside them. But when the amen arrives, the voice leans down, as if from a balcony, and whispers in John's ear at a distance you feel in your teeth. Soon, the same word it laid on you weeks ago, now placed where it wanted to put it all along. Joke 1 tries on courage and finds it tight. Congratulations, it's a haunting, just picked a favorite. Too bad it's not the dog. The next visit brings scripture, like water. 3 ministers this time, cautious as surgeons, careful as carpenters. One reads, one prays, one watches the loft. The presence behaves until the watcher relaxes, then drops a small clod of dry mud onto the open page. No rock, no splinter soil, as if the rafters remembered a road. When asked where it came from, the voice says, a place name, miles away. 1. None of you spoke aloud. Later, a writer confirms the name is eerie. Why wouldn't a voice know geography? But the timing tastes like a dare. Historians still argue whether any of this was an exorcism attempt. The word is anachronistic for the frontier. These ministers weren't trained in rites of banishment. They brought prayer, scripture, and presence stools of steadiness rather than the ceremonial evictions you read in later centuries. Some writers retrofit the drama. The local diaries show more patience and fewer Latin endings. You begin to notice how the voice behaves around Lucy's faith. When she prays aloud, it does not interrupt. When she finishes, it sometimes adds a small, unasked for word. Mercy, bread, rest, as if it has been given a turn and will take it. When a minister lifts his voice to rebuke its, a few do-eyed replies with a phrase from the same book in a tone that suggests it has read the footnotes, somewhere between etiquette and insolence. It is found a style, quirky sidelight. A handful of later sources claim the witch once finished a long, intricate genealogy. A minister fumbled mid-sermon begats upon begats without missing a name, which is either a tall tale invented by someone weary of Sunday afternoons, or the best party trick a disembodied archivist ever performed between visits. The cabin tries to rest. You and the family milk, mend, sweep, and pretend that night is just weather, but the presence schedules its own appointments. One afternoon, while John oils a hinge on the back door, the voice asks, soft as a shawl laid over shoulders, are you ready? John doesn't turn. For what? He answers, equal soft. For me, it says. He stands a minute longer, as if muscles could outweigh a sentence. Then puts the oil away and washes his hands twice. Joke 2. Thin as thread. Imagine having a to-do list where item 3 is be ominously addressed by rafters. Not every clergyman leaves convinced. One leaves muttering about trickery, about girlish ventriloquy, about schemes born at night that look silly by day. He returns 2 weeks later with an apology no bigger than a chestnut, because 2 nights after his doubt, he woke to his own name breathed behind his ear where no mouth should have been. A single syllable that turned his lamp cold. The apology isn't for belief, it's for tone. The presence accepts without gloating, which almost annoys more. The most careful minister of all is the one who asks nothing, reads nothing, and instead listens like a man counting waves. He sits in the chair you've learned to leave squared to the hearth, tips his head, and waits. The voice tests him with scraps, mimicry, gossip, the weather report a day ahead. He answers none of it. After an hour, he stands and bows a little. To the loft, you are talkative, he says, but not clear. The voice for once sounds almost curious. What do you want with these people to sleep? He answers, hand open like he's offering nothing more interesting than air. The silence that follows is the cleanest the room has felt in months. That night, you sleep almost foolishly well. It does not last, but it proves a point. Sometimes the only test that works is not a test at all. Mainstream fact. Despite waves of interventions, the activity in the Bell House continued for years, waxing and waning, irrespective of visitors' efforts. The legend preserves nights of respite, credited to prayer, as well as nights of escalation in spite of it, which is exactly the kind of inconsistency lived experiences tend to possess. On a late visit, a minister tries one more direct question. Do you belong to God? The rafters release a sound that is not quite laughter, not quite weeping. I belong, the voice says. Ask John how, but John does not answer. He has turned his face toward the window where dusk gathers. Like ink in water, the minister sees the line of his jaw and chooses a gentler closing prayer. Joke 3. Small and humane. Some tests you pass by, deciding not to grade them. When the ministers leave and the night resumes its normal work, room feels both lighter and stranger, like a sickbed just aired. The presence did not flee. It also did not win. It learned you as you learned it, where scripture slows it, where silence needles it, where John's name drops it into a gravity you can feel from across the room. You bank the fire, check the latch, and smooth the quilts, because that's what hands do when larger things won't be sorted. Somewhere above you, the loft adjusts its breath to the kettle's hush. You lie down into the kind of quiet that is not promise, but pause, and in the scene between floorboards, where your eyes go when you don't want to provoke the dark. You let one thought place itself like a coin. If the ministers couldn't send it away, perhaps the story doesn't require departure-only direction. The presence has chosen one. It says its name without asking. And whatever business it has announced soon it intends to keep. By now, you've learned the witch doesn't limit herself to the cabin. She walks the fields. 2F walk is the word for whatever she does when the night air carries her voice across a half-acre of bare soil. It starts with the animals. The Bell Farm has always had its share of restless livestock mules that roll their eyes when the weather shifts, chickens that complain at shadows, but this is different. One morning, you find the milk cow standing with her head pressed against the fence post, not moving, as if listening to something on the other side. When you approach, she shudders, backs away, doesn't let you touch her for the rest of the day. Mainstream fact. Bell witch accounts describe disturbances to animals' horses refusing to enter certain fields, dogs barking at empty air, and poultry scattering from unseen pursuers. Farmers in Robertson County in the 1800s took such behavior seriously. It often signaled a predator, of course something they couldn't name. The dogs, usually eager to chase anything that moves, start barking at corners of the pasture where nothing stirs. Some nights they whine at the barn door, refusing to step outside until morning. You notice hoof prints in the soft dirt that don't match any animal you own. Too narrow for a mule, too long for a deer. Quirky tidbit. One fringe retelling claims the witch would sometimes borrow a neighbor's horse in the dead of night, riding it hard until its flanks were foamed, then returning it to its stall before dawn. In rural lore, an unexplainably exhausted horse was often blamed on witches or spirits out for a joyride. Historians still argue whether these animal disturbances were exaggerated to pad the story or genuinely recorded events, but the fact remains. The farm's animals act like something invisible is sharing their space. And lately, you've started to feel it too. The first time is in the lower field, where the winter wheat is just sprouting pale green. You're alone, repairing a section, a fence, when you hear a footstep in the grass behind you. Not the wind, not the rustle of leaves, but the slow press of weight. You turn. Nothing. Then, a voice, softer than the wind, says, "Closer." Joke 1, muttered under your breath. "Sorry, I'm more of a personal space kind of farmer." The second time, you're carrying a bucket to the barn when when the air shifts like a door opening somewhere you can't see. The smell comes first, damp earth and a faint whiff of wood smoke, though no one is burning anything nearby. Then the sound of single, sharp click, as if a latch has been undone. You freeze. Something brushes past your sleeve, quick but deliberate. The bucket swings in your hand, sloshing water over your boots. Mainstream fact. Frontier superstition, often linked sudden, unexplained, smells especially smoke or sulfur to spirit activity. In the Bell Witch case, wood smoke was mentioned in at least one early recollection, though it's rarely included in modern summaries. The voice doesn't speak every time. Sometimes it's just a sense of being accompanied, an extra set of footsteps syncing with your own until you stop, and then stopping too. Quirky sidelight. An 1890s newspaper. Embellishment claimed the witch could ride the wind between farms, eavesdropping on conversations miles away before returning to share them. It's a colorful image, though no one living in the original Bell household used that phrase in recorded interviews. One evening, you and John are in the barn checking the harnesses when you both hear it. A low, steady humming, like someone idly singing to themselves. It's coming from the hayloft. You climb up, expecting to find Betsy hiding or one of the boys avoiding chores, but it's empty. The humming stops only when you're halfway down the ladder. Historians still argue whether such outdoor or outbuilding incidents point to a spirit with a wide range or to a mix of unrelated noises folded into one legend. But on this farm, it's all the Sanda, which goes where she pleases. Sometimes she seems almost playful. She moved tools from one side of the field to the other when you look away for a minute. She untied the knot in a rope you just secured. Once, she scatters seed in a pattern perfect circles in the dirt that makes John's brow crease deep. He doesn't say it aloud, but you can tell he's wondering whether that's some kind of side dot joke too. If she starts weeding the rows for us, I'll reconsider my opinion. Other times, she's sharper. You're out at dusk, leading a mule back to the barn, when a rock arcs out of the shadows and lands at your feet. You pick it up smooth, river-worn, not from your field, Mr. Voice says, and though it's half amused, you don't linger to see if she tries again. Mainstream fact. Projectile throwing is a common element in poltergeist folklore, and the Bell Witch story is no exception. Stones, sticks, and even household objects were reportedly thrown inside and outside the house, sometimes hitting their target, sometimes not. On a night when the moon hangs low and orange over the fields, you hear her singing again. This time, the words are clearer old, strange syllables that don't fit English or anything you know. Betsy says later she's heard the same tune in the loft, but the voice never repeats it when asked. Quirky tidbit. A few late accounts suggested that, which occasionally spoke in other languages, including fragments of what listeners thought might be ancient tongues. Skeptics argued it was gibberish, or a jumble of half-remembered words picked up from travelers. Historians still argue whether those foreign phrases were real languages, misheard, familiar ones, or pure invention. But the fact that so many people remember them lends the detail a certain stubborn weight. Joke 3. If she's multilingual, maybe she could help with the next trade negotiation. By the end of the month, you realize the farm itself feels different. The fields are no longer just work there, a stage. Every fence you mend, every row you plant, every animal you lead home, you feel watched. Sometimes it's tolerable, like a neighbor leaning on a gatepost to pass the time. Other times, it's the kind of attention that makes your shoulders tense, and somewhere in that invisible orbit, okay? The witch is waiting sometimes to hum, sometimes to mock, sometimes to throw a stone just close enough to remind you she's never far from reach. You think you've learned the inventory of a haunted house? Knocks, spurs, tugged quilts, the occasional airborne spoon. Then the gifts begin and asked for, unwound, arriving as if the rafters developed a pocket. The first one is small enough to ignore if you wanted to. A peach pit on the table at dawn, clean as a bead, laid precisely on Lucy's folded cachias if the witch has discovered coasters. No one in the house ate peaches yesterday. It's too early in the year for peach sellers to be roaming the road. Still, a pit is a pit. You tip it off the paper and into your palm, expecting stickiness. There's none. It smells faintly of fruit that never passed through your kitchen. By mid-morning, it's gone. Not misplaced gone. You check the hearth ledge. The floor cracks. The shelf slip. The table gives up no secrets. That's the pattern you'll learn fast. The presents don't stay unless they want to. Mainstream. Fact, among later 19th century retellings of the Bell Witch, several mention small objects produced by the voice of pause, pins, pebbles, even a tiny bottle appearing where all could see and disappearing later without a trace. Whether these were memory tricks or deliberate stagecraft, they became part of the legend's core. The next day, there's a coin. It's not shining dull as a button, worn past dates, but real enough to clink on the table when John taps it with his fingernail. Not mine, he says. Not mine, Lucy echoes. The boys swear the same. Betsy just stares. You put it in a cup for safekeeping. That night, the cup is empty, and on the windowsill, where wind couldn't set it, the coin sits, propped upright like a single, solemn eye. Why? You ask the loft, not expecting an answer, for looking. The voice says, amused joke, one wanders in because nerves need company. Great. Now the interior decorator is abstract. After that, it's a parade. Buttons arrive in tidy pairs where no sewing has been done. A single blue bead rolls from the loft at supper time, does a tidy circle on the floorboards, and stops against Betsy's shoe. No one moves to pick it up. It has the air of a rattlesnake pretending to be a marble. It's gone by morning, down a river. Stone appears on the hearth's smooth, striped, like a thumb's worried toy and somehow damp. The nearest river is a walk away. The stone lasts 2 days and then isn't anywhere, even in your memory's most generous corners. You realize the gifts feel like borrowed breath, present, undeniable, and then taken back as if you'd exhaled wrong. Quirky tidbit, a fringed strand of the tail insists that which once left a plait of horsehair braided so finely it looked like silk thread coiled in a teacup. When Lucy tried to touch it, the braid unraveled in a blink, no ends visible. No, not to blame as if the weave had only ever been a suggestion. Historians still argue whether these materializations were our neighbors' mischief, a child's dare, or the sort of collective embroidery stories where after many winters. But the way they arrived timed 2 eyes, not hands, makes trickery feel like too small a word while you're in the room. You begin a policy. If it's there at breakfast, you leave it till sundown. If it's still there at sundown, you put it in a box. The box becomes a museum of the moment, pins crossed like a tiny crucifix. A thimble that fits no finger in the house. A scrap of cloth with a blue stripe that matches none of your linens. A week later, the box is empty, its lid ajar like a mouth caught mid-sentence. Give it back, Betsy says to the air, more petulant than fearful. The air declines. Sometimes the gifts talk by themselves. You find a page torn from a book you don't own neat, printed, the kind of paper that smells like dust and patience. The page holds a psalm Lucy likes, Tia. She reads it aloud, and for the span of those verses, the room behaves like a church, quiet without suspense. When she finishes, the page flutters, though no breeze crosses the floor, and lies down over the kettle lid. It's gone when the stew's ready. Asterisk. Once there's a ribbon faded red, frayed at the end, tied in a bow, too careful for little hands. Betsy doesn't touch it. She looks at Lucy, and Lucy says, we will not wear what we did not ask for. The ribbon evaporates between one blink and the next, leaving on the table a faint line of dust, as if it lay there for years. Mainstream, fact, folded smaller. A handful of contemporary witnesses, not pamphleteers, but letter writers, claim to have seen needles, pins, or small bits of glass appear and fall, sometimes pricking a finger or landing in a lap. Dangerous gifts, if gifts they were. John tries treating the arrivals like negotiations. Leave something useful, he says one morning, not quite mocking, more like a man bargaining with weather. The voice waits until evening and then, delighted with itself, drops a lump of beeswax onto the table. Useful, undeniably, as he laughs, despite herself, the first unguarded laugh in days. The wax lasts. She marks it with her thumbnail and keeps it in her work basket, daring the air to take it. It doesn't. You begin to sense there are rules you don't know, but you can stumble into them like a man finding stepping stones in the dark with bare feet. Joke 2. At this rate, we'll furnish a whole kitchen from the loft, one molecule at a time. There's one object no one jokes about. Arrives on a raw morning when clouds sit on the ridge like sleeping cattle. On the windowsill, where last week's coin auditioned for eye duty, a tiny glass vial stands stoppered, cloudy, a thumbnail tall. No color shows through. No smell escapes. Betsy reaches first. John's hand is faster. He cups it like a coal. No, he says, to no one and everyone. The voice is quiet for a long while. Then, from the beam above the hearth, keep, you, don't. The vial goes into a box, and the box goes to a high shelf. And later, it goes somewhere else entirely that only John knows, out to the smokehouse. Perhaps, or into the ground, or into a pocket that doesn't come back empty. It will matter another day, but in this house, time sometimes sets a table for future guests. The gifts are not always things. Sometimes they're arrangements. You wake to find kernels of corn laid in a perfect ring on the floor by the door. 12. Not 11. Not 13. The dogs refuse to cross it until you break the circle with your foot. Another morning, ash on the hearth has been combed into lines like crops. Little field inside the house where the kettle could plant seed if it wanted. Lucy sweeps them away without comment. The brush makes no sound you can name. Quirky sidelight. A late cousin of the legend says the witch spelled Betsy's name with chestnuts on the table one fall night. Then spelled don't and sent the nuts rolling to the floor one by one. Don't? What? The story doesn't agree. Some say it meant don't marry a certain suitor. Others say it meant don't weep. Memory loves imperative moods. Sometimes the gift is an absence you can measure. The loaf set to cool on the sill is perfect when placed in warm air when turned. For slicing, no crumbs, no heel. Gone like a thought you meant to write down. Hungry, the voice says from a corner. Lucy bakes another without looking up. We feed our own first, she says. The second loaf survives. Historians still argue whether the presence, peering, and disappearing mirror is the give and take that folklore often uses to teach etiquette. Accept what is offered with courtesy. Refuse what isn't yours. Don't demand. Don't hoard. Or whether that's just the mind making manners out of a mystery because it needs a leash for fear. Visitors get the show. Kay, a neighbor woman, practical to her boots, sits at the table, refusing to look at the loft. A moment later, her own lost thimble lands gently at her elbow. She slips it onto her finger without a word, and finishes her mending while everyone pretends that returning property is perfectly normal. On her way out, a single hen's feather is discovered tucked into her shawl fringe like an autograph. She shakes it free, face tight. The feather floats, lands on the doorstep. Gan refuses to blow away, though the day is windy. John, warming to the game he didn't ask to play, tries a counter gift. He leaves 3 dried apples on the hearthstone at night, says nothing, and finds 2 in the morning, one shaved to a curl as fine as a wood shaving. The other, bitten with a neat half-moon of teeth that aren't anyone's in this house. He throws that one to the last of the hogs. The hog sniffs it, looks offended, and walks away. You don't mention it again? Mainstream fact. Again, like a pin, a popular variant insists the witch once praised Lucy's ham and left fruit as payment. An odd domestic commerce that made the spirits seem less demon and more neighbor with eccentric tipping habits. There are days the gifts feel like teasing. There are nights they feel like a code book you weren't taught to read. After a run of quiet evenings, you wake to find a neat row of 5 pebbles on the windowsill, then 4, then 3 on successive mornings, counting down to something. You prepare for thunder. What arrives is a lull 3 nights where the rafters say nothing and the dogs actually sleep. The 4th morning, the sill is empty and you feel foolish and grateful at once. Joke 3. Half a yawn. I'll take a countdown to silence over fireworks. You wonder, sometimes, if the gifts are the voice's way of touching the world without touching you. Proof of elbows in a room that has none. A button says I can have. A ribbon says I can give. A coin says we can share if you squint hard enough at the arithmetic. Then a spoon leaps from a shelf and dents the floor in a way you'll still be tripping on next year, and the arithmetic stops making sense. The strangest, quietest present comes when everyone is too tired to notice until evening. Under the table, stuck between 2 floorboards like a bookmark, someone finds a leaf. Not from your yard, a beech leaf, copper thin, edges crisp, veins fine as script. Tucked into its stem is a wisp of black thread. Lucy holds it by the stem and says nothing for a long time. Then she slides the leaf back where she found it and presses it down with her palm. It stays there for weeks, a little museum of patience at your feet. The witch does not take it. You decide secretly that not every gift belongs to the giver. By now, the house has learned to leave a little space at the table for what might arrive. You keep a corner of the hearth clear without admitting that you're keeping it clear. Pockets are checked before bed, lest you wake with a stone you never owned. The boys have stopped boasting that they won't be surprised. Surprise has made a home under their beds next to the dust. When the vial came, a thread pulled tight you couldn't see yet. When the coin stood like an eye, you realized attention can be minted. When the page lay down on the kettle, you understood that words in this house are also objects. The voice gathers them, spins them, returns them smudged. Every gift is a kind of handwriting. Every disappearance is an eraser that refuses to leave crumbs. And you can feel, in the way the room holds its breath at sundown, that the gifts are stepping stones to a shore you're not eager to reach. The witch is practicing having and taking on harmless things. Soon, she'll try those verbs on more than buttons and beads. The table is set. The box on the shelf waits, empties itself, waits again. Somewhere inside the rafters, a pocket turns out its lint and finds a new idea. You sleep with your hands under your pillow, and you dream of a house that returns everything it ever borrowed. In the morning, the windowsill is bare and mercifully ordinary. For one day, at least, no peach pit suggests a mouth you don't want to see smiling. Asterisk by late winter. The voice seems restless in a different way, not content just to whisper from the rafters or drop coins onto the windowsill. It wants witnesses, and not just the family. It starts with travelers. A peddler passing through stops at the Bell Place to sell pins and ribbons. John examines the goods. The man tilts his head toward the loft and says, "You keep someone up there?" John shakes his head. Before the man can ask again, a voice drifts down. "Pins are dearer in Nashville." The peddler nearly drops his box. Mainstream fact. Several Bell Witch stories involve strangers' neighbors, clergy, even curious skeptics coming to the house to test the haunting. It's only to leave convinced after hearing the voice speak directly to them. Some accounts, these visitors traveled from other states once the legend began to spread. Soon, Word travels faster than winter mud will let a wagon roll. You start seeing unfamiliar faces at the edge of the yard, some invited, some not, just watching the house like it's a stage. And maybe it is, because the witch rarely stays quiet for an audience. One Sunday afternoon, local school teacher comes to observe. He hasn't been in the house 5 minutes before the voice says, "Your sums don't sum, Mr. Jones." The man stammers, but later admits he'd miscounted the previous week's class takings. No one outside the school should have known. Quirky tidbit. A fringe version of the legend claims the witch occasionally traveled with guests, whispering in their ears days later from miles away. One man supposedly heard her voice again while on a riverboat and swore she described the cards in his hand before he looked. Historians still argue whether the witnesses added color to their own stories after the fact to feel part of the growing legend, or whether the witch truly expanded her reach beyond the Bell Farm. The bigger the crowd, the bolder she gets. When a pair of skeptical brothers from Kentucky arrive, she greets them by name before anyone can make introductions. "Welcome, William. Welcome, James," she says, her tone that of a polite hostess who might serve pirate poison. The men pale, mutter about prior warning, and leave before sundown. Asterisk, joke one, whisper to yourself as you watch their wagon go. Free entertainment, and she doesn't even pass a hat. Not all guests are unwelcome. A minister named Gunn visits, hoping to reason with the entity. He recites scripture aloud. To everyone's surprise, the witch recites it backward for words, sometimes ahead of him, sometimes in perfect sync. She even corrects him once, when he stumbles. "You skipped a verse," she says, and she's right. Mainstream fact. Period accounts claimed the witch was capable of long recitations, scripture, sermons, even poetry, and sometimes altered the tone to mock or flatter the listener. Betsy starts keeping tally of who comes, how long they stay, and what they hear. Her little book fills fast. One visitor swears he felt a tug on his hair as soon as he sat down. Another reports being slapped lightly, but enough to sting. Someone else claims his coat buttons were unfastened one by one while he stood still. Quirky sidelight. One sensationalized 1890s article claimed the witch could shake hands with visitors in complete darkness, the grasp feeling both human and oddly cold. No reliable first-hand accounts back it with the image stuck in retellings. Historians still argue whether these physical interactions came from clever human trickery, someone in the shadows, or whether multiple visitors simply convinced each other of what they felt. Then there's the night the witch calls a man out in front of everyone. A merchant is boasting about his profits when the voice interrupts. "And what of the horse you underfed till it died?" The room goes still. The man blusters, but his wife's face answers for him. They leave without finishing their T-joke. 2. Forget a conscience. Just borrow her for business negotiations. Crowds change the rhythm of the haunting. The family gets less rest, but there's a strange relief in sharing the burden, even for a few hours. It's one thing to doubt your own ears. It's another to see a stranger go pale at a word they weren't supposed to hear. Sometimes the witch seems to relish an audience. She hum a tune until someone guesses it, then switch to another mid-guess. She mimicked the guest's voice so precisely that they startle, thinking someone's spoken behind them. She even takes requests once, reciting a poem a visitor had learned as a child, something he swore no one there could have known. Mainstream fact. Such mimicry and apparent mind-reading are common in poltergeist cases worldwide, though skeptics attribute them to cold reading, lucky guesses, or prior knowledge gathered from gossip. A late winter evening brings the largest group yet: neighbors, friends, a pair of newspapermen from Nashville. The room is crowded, air thick with candle smoke. The witch greets nearly everyone by name, then falls silent. People murmur, shifting. Seth, low, rolling through the rafters like water over stones. You're all here for a story, she says. But you're in one already. No one speaks after that for a long minute. The fire pops. The clock ticks. And then, as if she's finished her performance, she vanishes into the kind of quiet that feels heavier than noise. Joke 3. Tss, murmured so, only you hear it. She's going to start selling tickets next. By spring, the Bell Farm isn't just a home, it's a theater. The audience changes, but the stage stays set. Creaking rafters, watchful silences, the unpredictable curtain of a voice that seems to know too much. And whether the witch is feeding on attention or simply enjoying the mischief, she's found a way to make her legend grow without lifting a single finger. Spring brings softer air, longer light, and a sharper edge to the witch's attention. It's as if the frost melting out of the ground has loosened something else, something in her reach. She doesn't just comment on visitors now. She starts steering conversations, bending the house toward topics you'd rather avoid. One warm evening, Lucy is shelling peas while a neighbor talks about his daughter's wedding plans. The witch interrupts with a flat, "It won't happen." The man laughs nervously, but the voice goes on. The groom is already looking elsewhere. The words hang there, smelling faintly of smoke. Tino, no one knows what to say. The neighbor finishes his tea, leaves without finishing his story, doesn't come back for weeks. Mainstream fact. In multiple early accounts, the bell, which was said to predict events, marriages, illnesses, even deaths with unsettling accuracy. Whether these were genuine predictions or clever readings of existing tensions, they contributed heavily to the legend's aura. It isn't all grim. She still toys with people when she feels like it. A traveling fiddler stops by one afternoon. He plays a tune, and halfway through, the witch whistles the same melody, keeping perfect time from somewhere above the rafters. He tries to throw her off by changing tempo. She matches him, laughing. Quirky tidbit. A little-known retelling claims the witch once beat a skilled fiddler in a duel of speed, whistling faster than his bow could move. He supposedly left muttering that no human lungs could keep that pace. Historians still argue whether these musical duels were embellishments, crowd-pleasing fabrications, or simply the product of someone hiding in the loft with quick lips and quicker ears. But the playfulness has limits. Betsy notices that the witch focuses more and more on her asking questions about her friends, her suitors, her future. Sometimes it's teasing. Sometimes it's warning. "Not him," the witch will murmur about a young man Betsy mentions. "His hands are careless." Other times she's cryptic. "Wait for the third, not the first." One night, with only the family present, the witch speaks in a tone you've never heard from her low, deliberate, stripped of its usual smirk. "You won't be happy with them," she tells Betsy. Everyone knows who she means. Betsy stares into the fire without answering. Joke 1, whispered only in your head because the room's too tight for laughter. Great. Now she's our relationship counselor. The predictions aren't limited to love. She comments on the weather, sometimes days in advance, is often right. She warns John to bring in the tools one night because the rain will run before the moon is gone. By morning, the yard is mud and the river's swollen. Lucy, though unsettled, begins quietly adjusting her garden chores to the witch's forecasts. Mainstream fact. Some accounts credit the witch with warning the peals about dangerous storms or poor planting days, advice that proved accurate often, enough to stick in memory. Not all her foresight is so welcome. She predicts a neighbor's illness. Within a month, the man is bedridden. She warns of a mule that will bolt during plowing, and it happens the next day, though no one is hurt. Each correct prediction feels less like luck and more like an invisible hand pushing the pieces. Quirky sidelight. One fringe version of the story claims the witch could describe events happening miles away in real-time: fires, accidents, even private arguments. Skeptics dismiss this as local gossip, dressed up as a supernatural sight. Historians still argue whether the accuracy of these warnings was exaggerated in hindsight, with only the hits remembered and the misses quietly forgotten by mid-spring. Her influence on visitors takes on a new flavor. She starts answering questions before they're asked. A merchant comes to discuss buying corn from John, and before he can speak, the witch says, "You'll offer 10 bushels for $2 a sack. He'll want more." The merchant blinks, laughs, and admits she's right. A clergyman arrives, intending to scold the family for indulging the spirit. Before he opens his mouth, the voice says, "Tell them about your brother's debt." His sermon never happens. Joke 2. Mumbled to yourself while the shaken minister leaves. She's basically Yelp for people's secrets. Betsy becomes the center of the more unsettling interactions. On a quiet afternoon, while she's mending a dress, the witch whispers, "Do you hear him calling?" Betsy frowns. "Who?" "The one you shouldn't follow." Betsy tries to ignore it, but her hands work slower. Later, she admits to Lucy that she's been hearing the same warning in her dreams. The witch never names the man directly, at least, not yet, but the tension grows. When he visits, the air in the room feels heavier. Once, the witch lets out a single, sharp laugh in the middle of his sentence. No one asks why. Mainstream fact. In the Bell Witch narrative, the entity famously opposed Betsy's engagement to a local man named Joshua Gardner, allegedly tormenting her until she broke it off. Some versions claim the witch offered reasons. Others say she simply made Betsy too frightened to continue. The family, though weary, has learned to live in a state of constant half-attention, listening for footsteps that don't belong, adjusting plans when the rafters advise it, bracing when strangers knock. The witch seems to feed on the dynamic, stretching her voice into every corner she can reach. Quirky tidbit. A later addition to the legend describes her predicting the arrival of specific guests down to the minute. Once telling the family to put the kettle on because a rider would crest the hill in 5 minutes. He did. Historians still argue whether such precise predictions were possible without someone stationed outside, or whether the timing was adjusted in retelling to make it more impressive. One night, during a visit from several neighbors, she quiets the room with a single word: "Listen." Everyone falls still. A moment later, she says, "He's coming." No one knows who he is until hoofbeats sound on the road. A rider appears in the yard, a man no one was expecting, with news of a cousin's sudden death. Joke 3. Whispered, just to keep the tension from snapping. Next time, she could write it on a note and save the drama. The spring light lengthens, the garden grows green, and the witch's influence grows alongside the corn. She's not just a voice in the house. Now she's a presence in decisions, in conversations, in futures you didn't know were open to her. And you can feel, in the way she lingers on certain names and events, that she's moving toward something more deliberate than mere mischief. By early summer, the witch stops pretending she's just a commentator. She starts directing. Not outright commands, at least, not yet, but suggestions, so pointed they're almost orders. It begins with small things. "Take the left fork at the creek," she tells John one morning as he sets out for town. He frowns. He usually takes the right. Later, he learns a wagon overturned on the right fork, blocking the road for hours. He doesn't tell her she was right, but she probably hears it in his silence. Mainstream fact. In several retellings, the Bell Witch gave specific travel advice or warnings, often couched in casual tones. The recipients later claimed the advice spared them inconvenience or danger. Then the suggestions creep into chores. "Plant the beans deeper," she tells Lucy. "The rain will be hard." Lucy doesn't argue. When the storm comes 2 days later, the beans stay put. It's not just guidance, it's intrusion. She comments on what you cook, what you wear, who you speak to. Sometimes it's playful. That color makes you look like boiled turnip. Sometimes it's sharp. One evening, she tells a visiting neighbor, "You forgot to pay the widow for her eggs." The woman flushes red, mumbles, and changes the subject. Quirky tidbit. One French variant of the story claims the which once instructed a visiting man to return a stolen tool to his neighbor before sundown, or you'll find it walks back without your hands. He supposedly obeyed. Historians still argue whether these intrusions reflect an actual voice heard by all, or the gradual intimidation of a household by one unseen, manipulative humans, someone using the witch persona to pressure and shame. The control becomes most obvious with Betsy. The voice now inserts itself into her private moments. If she hums a tune, the witch will finish the verse. If she writes a letter, key, the witch will recite the opening aloud before she's finished the first line. One hot afternoon, Betsy steps outside to fetch water. Key, she's barely reached the well, when the witch's voice follows her. "Don't go to the garden today." Betsy hesitates, feeling foolish for listening. But when she later walks that way, she finds a fallen tree limb exactly where she would have been standing. "It's heavy enough to break bone." Joke 1. Muttered to yourself, because the heat makes everything absurd. Maybe she's just running a very aggressive safety campaign. The interference in Betsy's courtship sharpens. The witch starts speaking over the young man when he visits, drowning his words with humming or sudden, loud laughter. Once, she repeats everything he says in a mocking sing-song, syllable by syllable, till Betsy excuses herself and doesn't come back into the room. Mainstream fact, according to the legend. The witch relentlessly harassed Joshua Gardner, Betsy's fiancé, until their engagement was called off. The reasons were never entirely clear, though some versions say the witch warned of future misery if they married. It isn't all scorn. Occasionally, she praises someone's choicer turn of phrase, a cleanly mended shirt, a well-made stew butt. It always feels like she's reinforcing her ability to notice, to judge, to have a say. One evening, she tells John to bring an extra lantern into the barn. He does, half in defiance, half because he can't stand the thought of proving her right again. In the far stall, he finds a raccoon tangled in a feed sackcloth, angry, and inches from gnawing its way free. He lets it go outside the yard. She says nothing, but the silence feels smug. Quirky sidelight. One little-known printed account insists the witch sometimes gave tips on animal care, predicting a calving, warning of a sick chicken, or even claiming credit when a cow recovered. Historians still argue whether these were lucky guesses, common rural knowledge, or tales polished to make the witch seem both terrifying and useful. As summer deepens, the voice grows more emboldened in front of guests. She tells one man not to lend his plow, another to forgive a debt. A traveling preacher receives a public warning. Stop visiting the widow miller after dark. He leaves before supper. Joke 2, whispered, so the rafters maybe don't hear if she opens a confession booth or charging admission. You begin to notice that the family reacts faster to her cues now. A dropped hint about whether sends Lucy to cover the seedlings. A comment about strangers on the road makes John check the latch twice. Whether they mean to or not, they're following her lead more than they're fighting it. One hot night, with the windows open for a breeze, she says clearly into the dark, "He's at the fence." John grabs a lamp and steps out. Sure enough, a man is there drunk, muttering, halfway to climbing over. He stumbles off when John shouts. The witch says nothing after, but the crickets seem louder, as if they've picked up her role. Mainstream fact. Similar warnings appear in other poltergeist legends, where the entity acts like a watchman for the household, though usually in between more malicious pranks. The balance is strange half-protector, half-tormentor. She warn of a loose board one moment and pull your hair the next. She'll save you trouble and cost you twice as much by nightfall, and always there's Betsy. The witch's fixation deepens until the rest of you feel like secondary characters. If Betsy laughs too freely with someone, the witch will interrupt. If she's quiet too long, the witch will ask why. Sometimes she calls her name in the middle of the night just to hear her answer. Joke 3. It's offered only in your thoughts. Nothing says peaceful home like a ghost who won't respect personal space. By midsummer, you realize the witch isn't just observing anymore. She's shaping days, steering choices, choosing when to act and when to stand back. And the longer she does it, the more it feels like she's not preparing for something, she's already in it. And so are you. By late summer, the air hangs heavy and damp, and so does the witch's presence. The heat slows the rest of you, but she seems sharper than ever. Her voice threading through the days like a needle pulling tight. She begins testing limits, not just hints or warnings. Now she starts giving direct challenges, almost like she's daring you to refuse. One afternoon, while John repairs the fence, she says, plainly, "Leave that board loose." He pauses, hammer in hand, then tightens it. Anyway, the next morning, the board is gone entirely, vanished without a splinter on the ground. John doesn't replace it. He just works around the gap. Jaw tight. Mainstream fact. Some versions of the Bell Witch legend include incidents where physical objects were moved, altered, or destroyed overnight without explanation, as though the entity wanted to prove it could change the environment directly. She also begins speaking in strange, deliberate fragments. "The river knows," she says one evening, when no one's mentioned the river. Another time, while Lucy kneads bread, she murmurs, "You'll have visitors before the flour is gone." The knock comes less than an hour later, neighbors needing to borrow a lantern. Quirky tidbit. One fringe retelling claims the witch sometimes spoke in riddles that only made sense weeks later, as if she enjoyed leaving puzzles hanging in the air. Historians still argue whether these prophecies were embellished to give the witch an air of long-term cunning, or whether they were simply the product of coincidence retrofitted into meaning. With Betsy, the game sharpens further. If she sits near her fiancés, the witch will say, "2 chairs apart," or "the wind will rise." If Betsy laughs, the witch repeats it in a hollow, echoing version, as though mocking the sound. More than once, Betsy leaves the room without a word. One sweltering evening, the young man comes to call. The witch greets him with a sing-song, "The hollow's waiting for you." The words are odd, but his face tightens, and he leaves before dusk. Betsy doesn't explain, and no one asks. Joke 1, uttered under your breath to keep the mood from sinking. She'd be great at ruining surprise parties. Sometimes the witch tests the guests. 2. A traveling salesman brags about his strong hands, so she challenges him to hold an egg without breaking it while she counts the seconds. The egg cracks at 5. He swears he didn't squeeze. She laughs for a solid minute, the sound rolling through the beams. Mainstream fact. Egg-related pranks and challenges appear in other rural ghost tales, as often as harmless tests of a visitor's nerve or honesty. Her control over the tone in the room becomes undeniable. A light-hearted conversation can sour in seconds with a single remark from the rafters. A tense silence can break with her sudden humming, sometimes a hymn, sometimes a bawdy tavern tune, depending on who's present. Quirky sidelight. 1. Obscure 19th century newspaper account claimed the witch could read a man's vice from the sound of his step, changing her voice to mock him accordingly. Historians still argue whether this was metaphored, scribing her knack for sizing people up quickly, or meant literally by those who repeated it. One night, group of visitors dares to provoke her. They set a small bell on the table, saying, "If you're real, ring it." For a long moment, nothing happens. Then the bell tilts on its side and rolls to the edge, stopping just before it falls. No one touches it. She doesn't speak for the rest of the night. Somehow, that silence unnerves everyone more than the movement did. Joke 2. Whisper to yourself as people shuffle out. Well, she's got a flair for timing. I'll give her that. By now, the witch's interventions aren't limited to words or minor pranks. You find tools in different places than you left them. Seed sacks untied. Doors you swore were shut now ajar. Sometimes you sense her presence even when she doesn't. Speak like a shift in the air pressure, or the way a candle flickers when no breeze touches it. Betsy begins sleeping less. You hear her pacing at night, or murmuring, as if in quiet argument. Once, you pass her in the hall, and she startles, saying she thought you were her. She won't say what her wanted. Mainstream fact. Historical accounts claim the witches' most intense focus in later years was on Betsy, especially in the period leading up to the broken engagement. Some suggest this was personal. Others see it as the heart of the haunting's purpose. The family starts keeping more lamps lit in the evenings, though it doesn't stop the voice. Light doesn't bother me, she says once, almost gently, as if correcting a misunderstanding. Quirky tidbit in some ghost lore. Spirits avoid strong light, but the Bell Witch's indifference to lamps and firelight is cited as proof she didn't follow typical rules. Historians still argue whether this detail was added to make her stand out from other spirits in popular lore. One night, with the air thick and unmoving, she speaks to you directly. Do you think you're safe because you see nothing? Not loud, not threatening, but it's close. Close enough that the hairs on your arms lift. Joke 3. Thought only in self-defense. Safe. Lady, I'm barely getting my chores done here by the time the corn is high. The witch has woven herself into nearly every decision, conversation, and mood on the farm. And you can feel, without her needing to say it, that she's winding the rope tighter. She's not finished. Autumn rolls in with a crispness that should clear the air. But somehow it doesn't. The witch doesn't fade with the cooler nights if anything. She sharpens, like a blade kept honed on the stone of the family's daily life. She's more present in the mornings now. Her voice sometimes the first thing you hear. Up before the frost, she murmured while you're still tangled in your blanket. Or, don't drink that, just as your hand reaches for the cup. More than once, you set something down without even realizing you're a bang. Mainstream fact in later accounts. The Bell Witch was said to have grown bolder over time, interacting more frequently and with less provocation, until she was almost a constant in the household. Her attention to detail becomes unnerving. She points out a dropped stitch in Lucy's knitting before Lucy sees it. She tells John his left bootlace is about to snap. She warns that a pumpkin on the back porch is rotting inside, though it looks fine. She's right, of course. Quirky tidbit. One obscure retelling claims the witch once directed Lucy to check under a floorboard, where she found a mouse's winter stash of corn kernels. Why that mattered to the witch is never explained. Historians still argue whether these mundane proofs of her presence were remembered because they were harmless, a relief from the heavier incidents, or whether they were simply filler in. A story too tense to carry only dread. The focus on Betsy reaches its most unbearable pitch. The witch now speaks almost every time her fiancé visits. Sobs. It's direct insults. He stinks of pride. Other times, it's whispered phrases to faint for the rest of you to catch, but enough to make Betsy's expression harden. One evening, with the windows fogged from the warmth inside, the witch says clearly, "You will not marry him." There's no humor, no teasing, just finality. Betsy freezes, and the young man's face goes pale. No one speaks for the rest of the visit. Joke 1. Thought grimly to yourself, because no one would laugh. Guess we won't be needing the wedding china. It isn't only Betsy under scrutiny. Guests get the same treatment. The witch will greet them by name before introductions, list details about their lives, drop hints about things they haven't shared. A traveling preacher is told, "You've been doubting your calling." He denies it, but his eyes say otherwise. Mainstream fact. Reports from the time describe the witch revealing private details about visitors' lives, sometimes down to exact phrases they had spoken elsewhere. This unnerved even skeptics. Once, she tells a neighbor, "Your cow will calve tonight, and you'd better be ready." The woman rushes home, and by morning she's sending word of a healthy calf. The witch doesn't even comment on the news. It's as if she already knew the outcome. Quirky sidelight. One French tale says she once delivered a calf herself, though whether this meant physically or just by alerting the farmer in time is never clarified. Historians still argue whether these feats were genuine foresight, lucky timing, or knowledge gathered through an unseen human network of gossip. The physical disturbances. Cup again, doors swinging shut without wind. Chairs scraping just enough to draw the eye. Dishes rattling faintly when the room is otherwise still. One night, a plate slides 3 inches across the table as if nudged by an invisible hand. No one touches it for the rest of the evening. Joke 2, muttered under your breath. Fine, she can clear the table next. Betsy begins spending more time outside, but the witch follows her there. So while she's hanging laundry, the clothesline begins to sway, though the air is perfectly still. The voice says, "You can't hide in the daylight." Betsy drops a clothespin and leaves the rest of the wash unfinished. Mainstream fact. The Bell Witch's activity wasn't confined to the house. Some accounts say she followed family members into the fields, the yard, even on trips away from home. By my datum, the tension is so thick that even silence feels like her doing. She doesn't have to speak to remind you she's here. You feel it in the way the fire pops or the way a shadow lingers in the corner longer than it should. One night, with the moon high and white over the fields, she breaks a long quiet to say, "It's almost time." No explanation, no follow-up. The words just sit there, cold in the warm air. And you know better than to ask. Quirky tidbit. A late 19th century storyteller claimed the witch often spoke in such ominous fragments before significant events, though whether those events were truly connected was never proven. Historians still argue whether these forewarnings were remembered selectively to make the haunting seem more like a plotted story than a chain of random incidents. Joke 3. Whispered only in your thoughts, because your voice might carry if she's planning a big finale. I'd like to opt out, and then, without warning, the nights turn heavier, as though whatever she's been winding toward is drawing close. You start to wonder if her idea of almost time is measured in days or in the kind of long, patient waiting that doesn't care how ready you feel. The first frost comes in silver streaks, clinging to fence rails and the thatch of the barn roof, and the witch greets it like a herald. Cold clears the air, she says one morning, and shows what's been hiding. It's not a threat. Exactly, but you can't find the comfort in it either. Her presence is different, now less playful, less scattered. She speaks less often, but when she does, the words hang in the air like nails in wood. Visitor's small joke goes unanswered. Betsy's nervous laugh is left to die on its own. Even the crickets outside seem to hesitate after she talks. Mainstream fact. By the end of the Bell Witch's most active years, the tone in the house was said to have shifted from mischievous to grave, as if something final was approaching. Betsy spends more time in her room, and when she emerges, she's pale, her eyes rimmed red. The witch no longer disguises her disdain for Betsy's fiancé, cutting in over his voice, mocking his plans for the future, once even telling him, "Leave before the frost melts, or you'll regret it." The decision, when it comes, isn't announced, it's simply known. The engagement is over. Betsy doesn't explain to anyone, but the witch's silence afterward feels satisfied, almost smugged. Joke 1. Dry and quiet in your head. Guess she's finally finished playing matchmaker from hell. Quirky. Tidbit. Some fringe versions of the legend claim the witch released Betsy after the engagement ended, as if the entire haunting had been centered on preventing the marriage. Others dismiss this as a neat narrative, about tied long after the fact. Historians still argue whether the timing was coincidence, manipulation by a human source, or genuine supernatural influence. The winter deepens, and with it comes a strange change. Her voice grows softer, her interruptions fewer. Sometimes days pass without a sound from her. John comments that maybe she's gone to haunt someone else, but no one says it too loudly, as if calling attention to the quiet might break it. Mainstream fact. Some accounts say the witch eventually promised to leave temporarily, predicting she would return years later to visit one of the Bell sons in the last weeks before her absence. She almost slips into the role of a watchful guardian again. She warns Lucy about a patch of black ice on the path, tells John to bank the fire higher before a bitter wind, hums softly in the evening as if trying to soothe rather than startle. It's almost worse than the cruelty, this reminder that she could choose to be gentle and usually chose not to. Joke too, muttered only in thought. If this is her version of being nice, I'd hate to see her trying. Then, one frosty night, she speaks as the family sits by the fire. I will leave soon, she says, but not forever. The words are final, and no one asks for details. Quirky sidelight. A rare telling claims she named the year she would return 107 years later. Unsurprisingly, no credible event was recorded then, but the date lives on in folklore. Historians still argue whether this promise was part of the original tale or an embellishment added to keep the story alive for future generations. In the days after, her voice grows fainter, the disturbances fewer. On her last night tiff, it can be called that she says, only, you'll remember me. It's not a question. Then the rafters go quiet, and the silence feels heavier than her presence ever did. Joke 3. Quiet in your own mind as the wind rattles the shutters, as if forgetting was ever an option. Asterisk now. The house is still. You notice the creak of the boards again. It's a soft scuff of Lucy's slippers on the floor. It's a pop and sigh of the fire, ordinary sounds that have been buried under her voice for so long. The absence isn't clean. Tease. It lingers in the way everyone listens for something that doesn't come. Outside, frost settles in the fields, each blade of grass wearing a thin coat of ice that will melt by midday. The river moves slow under a pale winter sun. You walk the fence line, your breath drifting white in the air, and it feels strangely like the world has stepped back into its own shape. Some nights, you think you hear her, just the echo of her laugh in the crack of a log, or the faint hum of a tune on the wind, but it fades before you can decide whether it's real. You stop bracing yourself every time a door shifts in its frame. You stop expecting commentary on every choice you make. The quiet becomes a blanket, heavy but warm, and slowly you pull it around yourself. You remember her, of course. You remember the predictions, the pranks, the whispers in the dark. You remember the way she could turn a room cold with a single word. But you also remember the nights she let you be, those rare hours when she watched without acting. And the air was only thick, not hostile. And somewhere in that stillness, you realize you're not waiting for her to come back. The frost will keep falling, the seasons will keep turning, and the quiet, whatever's left of it, will stay yours, at least for now. You let your eyes close. The house holds, the dark holds, and you sleep.